tonight's journey begins with this quiet, mind-bending question, one that sits at the edge of science, philosophy, and imagination. Is everything around us real, or are we living inside something designed, rendered, maybe even coded? But before we explore that, a gentle invitation. Where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Leave a comment below. We love seeing this curious little community span across time zones and continents. And if you enjoy these peaceful science stories, we'd be grateful if you subscribed. We're growing toward our first 200 subscribers, and every one of you helps this world grow a little wider. Now, breathe in, let your mind settle, and follow this thought into the quiet. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Welcome to the illusion. Close your eyes and imagine this. Everything you touch, everything you see, even the sound of this voice, could all of it be pixels in a cosmic rendering engine? Could the warmth of your breath, the ticking of your clock, the fabric of your thoughts themselves to be the output of something deeper, something not quite real? This is the simulation hypothesis, and it's not science fiction anymore. In 2003, philosopher Nick Bostrom shook the intellectual world with a thought experiment that now echoes through Silicon Valley, NASA offices, and theoretical physics labs. If technology continues to evolve, and if it becomes possible to simulate an entire conscious world, then isn't it statistically more likely that we are in one of those simulations, rather than the original base reality? And just like that, the floor beneath our feet felt less certain. But this isn't a horror story. This is something softer, something stranger. Think of it like this. If you could design a universe, a fully interactive, self-sustaining, intelligent one, how would you make it? You might want it to be efficient. You'd build rules. You'd encode gravity, light, time. You'd write code that only renders what is observed, just like modern video games do to save processing power. You'd give the inhabitants freedom, so they never know they're in a loop. And if you were really clever, you'd make the code look like physics. Now open your eyes to our world. Does it seem so different? Consider this. Quantum mechanics, the bedrock of all physical science, behaves nothing like the smooth reality you feel. It's fuzzy, random, observational. A particle is nowhere until you look at it. A choice isn't made until it's measured. Just like a system trying to save on memory. Everywhere you look in the foundations of matter, you find patterns, probabilities, not certainty, the kind of uncertainty that screams this world isn't as solid as you think. And yet, it feels so real, doesn't it? You taste food, you fall in love, you cry at the ending of a story. How can something so rich in feeling be artificial? But here's where it gets interesting. Maybe reality was never about matter. Maybe it was always about experience. Maybe the simulation, if it exists, is not a trick, but a vessel, a stage for consciousness to bloom, a place where joy and pain, laughter and longing, have weight, even if the atoms beneath them do not. There is comfort in that idea, because if this is a simulation, it is the most beautiful, heartbreakingly detailed one imaginable, and we are not its prisoners. We are its stars. So tonight, we're not here to fear the illusion. We're here to walk through it, slowly, curiously, peacefully, and see where it leads. Not to an answer, but to a deeper question. Welcome to the illusion. Chapter 2. The code beneath reality. If you peel back the curtain of what we call real, if you go beneath the trees and streets and skin and stars, what do you find? You find rules. You find math, not bricks, not wires, not cosmic furniture holding things up, no scaffolding of steel or spirit. Just equations. Elegant, brutal, unflinching laws, humming silently beneath everything. Force equals mass times acceleration. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. Probabilities collapse when observed. And so we must ask, is the universe built on matter, or on information? Because the closer you look at our world, the more it begins to resemble code. Everything physical, it seems, can be described in numbers. Not just approximately, but perfectly. An electron doesn't swirl chaotically, It dances in precise, quantifiable steps. Light bends not randomly but exactly, predictably every time. Even the chaos of the stars is governed by equations. So much so that a physicist can write the behavior of black holes in chalk. This is not normal. This is not intuitive. This is not what you'd expect from a world born of pure randomness. It's what you'd expect from a program. Imagine a simulation, a digital environment built not with pixels but with particles, a codebase that doesn't just render mountains and rivers but time, space and cause itself, a universe that booted up 13.8 billion years ago, not with a bang of matter, but with a line of logic, from 0 to 1. In fact, the entire field of digital physics is built on this idea that at the base layer of reality, the most fundamental building block is not the atom, but the bit, a 1 or a 0, a yes or a no, a flip of cosmic information that says something exists here, or it does. Physicist John Archibald Wheeler called it, from bit. In his view, every particle, every field, every force, emerges from the yes-no questions that nature is constantly asking and answering. Reality, he believed, isn't made of stuff. It's made of logic, just like a computer. And what is a computer but a system that takes inputs and runs calculations to produce outputs? Think now about your senses. What you see, hear, smell, all of it is input. It's processed by neurons, filtered by attention, rendered into color, taste, thought. There is no raw reality. There is only perception, a deeply personal interface, a rendering, just like software. And this brings us to a haunting idea. What if we are users in a system we cannot escape? Not because we are trapped, but because the system is our escape. What if this world with its trees and rain and hunger and music is not the prison, but the portal? What if this simulation, if it exists, was never meant to deceive, but to deliver? Deliver what? Experience, emotion, awareness, growth. Maybe we're not NPCs, maybe we're the players, but even players need rules. And the rules of our world are strangely precise. The speed of light, fixed. The Planck constant, exact. The strength of gravity just right for galaxies, yet soft enough for life. In a chaotic, unguided universe, such values should vary. They should be messy, unstable, temporary. Instead they are perfect. Too perfect. This is what troubles physicists and excites simulation theorists, because if the universe were designed to host conscious agents, it would look exactly like this, mathematically consistent, yet richly interactive, like a game, like a dream, like code. Even space-time itself may be quantized, broken into discrete, digital-like units, like pixels on a screen too small for our eyes to see, but always there, always ticking. It's as if the universe is not a continuous analog flow, but a carefully timed digital rendering, updating frame by frame, faster than thought. And every now and then you feel it, don't you? The glitch, the way time seems to slow when you stare at the clock, the moments of déjà vu, the flicker in the corner of your vision, the strange synchronizations, the way reality feels heavier when you start to question it. It's as if the code is responding to your awareness. And maybe it is, because a simulation, a real one, would have to optimize itself, just like your brain does. It would predict, it would compress, it would calculate only what's needed, and ignore what isn't. There's no need to simulate the inside of a star you'll never touch. No need to render the back of your head until you look in a mirror. No need to calculate every possible path, just the one you choose. A simulation isn't omniscient, it's intelligent. And maybe, just maybe, the universe is too. So where does this leave? It leaves us in a world that behaves more like software than stone. A world ruled by rules that feel written. A cosmos that functions not like a machine but like a language. And if that's true, then perhaps the question isn't whether we're in a simulation. Perhaps the real question is, what is it trying to teach us? Because even in code there is meaning. Even in illusion, there is truth. And even here, in this strange, precise, mysterious world, you are not an accident. You are the awareness inside the system, the player, the witness, the dreamer. Welcome to the code beneath reality. Chapter 3. What is real? The problem of perception. Let us ask the simplest question that no one can ever truly answer. What is real? Is it what we can touch, taste, hear and see? Is it the weight of your body on the bed, the sound of rain outside your window, the distant hum of a refrigerator late at night? Is it the pain you once felt, the joy of a song, the warmth of someone's voice in the dark? Or is it something deeper? Because when you peel away perception, when you strip reality down to its bare essence, you're left with a troubling truth. You don't perceive the world directly. You perceive signals, electrical impulses, light frequencies, vibrations in the air. Your brain takes these raw ingredients and reconstructs them into a model, a simulation, if you will, of the world around you. But the model is not the world. It is an interpretation. The red apple you see is not red because the apple is inherently red. It is red because your brain interprets certain wavelengths of light that bounce off its skin. To a dog, that same apple looks grey. To a bee, perhaps it glows with ultraviolet patterns you'll never see. Which version is the real one? They all are, and none are. Reality, it seems, is not what is, but what is experienced. And that changes depending on who or what is doing the experience. This is the ancient problem of perception. Philosophers have wrestled with it for millennia, from Plato's shadows on the cave wall to Descartes' evil demon tricking the senses. And in the age of modern science, the question has not gone away. In fact, it has become sharper, because now we know that the human brain is not just a passive receiver of information. It is a prediction engine. It fills in gaps. It edits noise. It creates meaning from randomness. It constructs a story of the world, one that feels smooth and stable, even though the raw data is jagged and incomplete. What you call seeing is mostly guessing. What you call reality is mostly memory. You don't see the present. You see a version of the past, processed and delayed by neural computation. The world you think you inhabit is a hallucination your brain and body have agreed upon, and yet, that hallucination is shared. Others seem to see it too. You touch a cup, and they touch the same cup. You see the moon, and they see the same moon. So we call it real. But here's the twist. In a well-made simulation, this would also be the case. If we are in a shared virtual space, a digital environment, then shared perception is precisely what you'd expect. A single rendered world, viewed from billions of perspectives, each personalized, each filtered, each slightly misaligned, and yet fundamentally synchronized. You wouldn't know the difference, because your experience is not of the world itself, but of the interface. Just like you don't see the raw code of a video game, you see the colors, the shapes, the motion, the illusion of depth, and gravity and sunlight. Beneath that is logic. Beneath that, numbers. What if our world is the same? What if your perception, what you call real, is simply the skin of a deeper computation? Even now your brain is running a virtual world in your head. It renders the position of your limbs. It simulates sounds before you hear them. When you dream, it renders entire cities out of silence. When you imagine, it generates worlds that never existed. You are already a simulation of yourself, and yet you feel real. You feel you. Perhaps real is not the right word. Perhaps the real question is, does it matter? If the sky is simulated, but it still makes you cry with awe, is it less meaningful? If the face of someone you love is code but your love for them is true, is that love any smaller? No, because what you feel is not made of atoms or logic gates. What you feel is made of experience, and experience, whether analog or digital, is still real to you. It's all you ever have. The illusion of permanence, the sensation of presence, the memory of a moment. These are what make a life, and whether they are housed in carbon or silicon, they still shine. Even in a simulation, you are capable of kindness, of grief, of beauty, of wonder, and if that's not real, what is? So tonight, as you rest and let this thought unfold in the quiet behind your eyes, consider this. You don't need certainty to feel truth. You don't need proof to live deeply, and you don't need to escape the simulation to make it matter. Because even if this world is rendered, it is rendered for you, not to fool you, but to awaken you. You are not a spectator in a fake world. You are the center of a meaningful one. Chapter 4. The Simulation Argument. It begins with a simple line of logic, unassuming at first, quiet in its presence, yet devastating in its implications. If you truly follow it through, a philosophical proof that, like a slow-moving wave, rises behind you and lifts everything you thought was grounded. This is the simulation argument, and it doesn't need flashing lights or science fiction visuals to scare you. All it needs is probability, reason, and the willingness to accept that reality might not be what it seems. It was first formalized by philosopher Nick Bostrom, not as a movie plot, but as a serious academic idea, one that continues to echo in labs, conferences, and private conversations between thinkers who rarely allow themselves to say the word matrix out loud, but quietly wonder whether we're living in one. The argument is built not on physics, not on glitchy experiences or déjà vu or coincidences, but on logic, hard, clean, and unsettling. And it goes like this. Suppose that one day, whether in 100 years or 1,000, a civilization like ours develops the computing power to run detailed simulations of reality, not just weather models or physics engines, but entire virtual worlds containing digital people with consciousness, emotions, lives, and histories. People who don't know they're simulated, because the simulation is that good. This idea isn't science fiction anymore. Already today, with our limited technology, we simulate atoms, proteins, societies, economies. We build artificial worlds in video games, with increasingly believable characters, artificial intelligences, that learn, evolve, and mimic our own thoughts. Given enough time, most technologists agree that simulations will become so detailed, so refined, that even the simulated beings within them will believe they are real. Now here's the critical point. If it's possible to create such simulations, if a civilization can survive long enough, and gain the computational power to simulate entire worlds, then they probably won't create just one. They will create many, millions, billions, perhaps trillions. And if that's the case, then the number of simulated minds in the universe will vastly outnumber the number of original biological minds. For every base reality like ours, there may be millions of virtual ones, indistinguishable from the real thing. So here's the punchline. If that's true, if simulated minds vastly outnumber real ones, then statistically speaking, it is far more likely that you are one of the simulated minds, not one of the originals. Not because you're special, but because you're common. Because most minds across time, across space, across all possible realities, would exist inside a simulation, not outside it. If 10 billion copies of a world exist, and only one is the original, which are you most likely to wake up in? And there it is, the simulation argument. It doesn't claim we are in a simulation. It doesn't say we should panic. It just presents three possibilities, and says that at least one of them must be true. 1. Civilizations never reach the level of technological maturity needed to run simulations of conscious minds. Perhaps they go extinct, or choose to stop. 2. Civilizations that do reach that level of maturity choose not to run simulations, perhaps for moral or philosophical reasons. Or 3. They do run simulations, and we are most likely living in one. You only need one of the first two options to be true to escape the simulation. But if both are false, if civilizations can run simulations, and if they would, then the third option follows, and with it, the question that never stops echoing. What if we're not real in the way we thought we were? And here's the part that unsettles so many. We are already approaching that threshold. We've already mapped the human genome. We're already simulating the folding of proteins, the spread of viruses, the behavior of neural networks. We've already built worlds like Minecraft, No Man's Sky, and entire procedurally generated galaxies. We have AI models that write music, paint, converse, and even dream. What happens when you combine those systems with quantum computing and virtual reality? What happens when consciousness is uploaded, not copied but experienced in code? What happens when the simulated become the creators of their own simulations? The line begins to blur, and that's where the idea ceases to be hypothetical, not because we've proven it, but because we've entered the very chain of logic that it describes. We are, perhaps, the ancestors of those future simulations, or we are already inside one of theirs. Of course, it could all be wrong. This could be base reality, the one true origin, the real, tangible physical universe. It could be that no one ever builds simulated worlds, that no one ever survives long enough to try. But then we must ask, why are we so close to doing it ourselves? And that's the haunting silence at the end of the simulation argument, not the conclusion itself, but the way it mirrors our own trajectory. We are walking straight into the hypothesis, whether we like it or not. And yet, as this idea blooms in your mind, as the implications ripple out into your thoughts like water disturbed in a still pond, there is something strangely peaceful in it. Because if we are simulated, then what does that mean? It means there was a creator, perhaps. It means there is design, maybe. It means that everything, your memories, your relationships, your fears, your triumphs, all of it, is still real, at least to you, and possibly to the system itself. It means your life was not random, but rendered not by accident, but by intention. Does that not feel in some small way like meaning? Even in an artificial world, your tears are wet, your laughter is bright, your hopes feel real because you feel real. Simulation or not, consciousness matters, because consciousness is the one thing that cannot be faked. Not to you. You are aware, you are experiencing, you are listening now, thinking now, breathing now, and that makes you real in every way that counts. So as the simulation argument settles into the background of your mind, like a quiet hum beneath the world, let it not disturb your sleep, let it deepen your wonder, because this world, whatever it is, still gives you light in the morning, music in the silence, love in the darkness. It still offers beauty, mystery, discovery, and depth, and that in the end is the greatest argument for its meaning, not whether it's simulated, but whether it still moves you, and it does, because it is yours. Chapter 5. Bits, Brains, and Brains. There is a strange convergence happening beneath the surface of everything we know, a quiet folding of disciplines, where computer science bleeds into neuroscience, and physics begins to sound more like metaphysics, where the language of bits, the structure of brains, and the stretched-out fabric of higher dimensional brains all start to echo the same underlying truth, a whisper that reality, no matter how solid it may appear, might be far less analog, far less physical, far less real than we once believed. When you begin to study consciousness, not as a philosophical riddle, but as a data processing phenomenon, something that arises not from spirit or soul, but from the dynamic interaction of patterns, of feedback loops, of coded electrochemical exchanges across networks of matter, you start to notice something peculiar, that the brain, this soft 3-pound galaxy inside your skull, operates not as a passive receiver of information, but as an interpreter, a predictor, a compression algorithm that takes in vast complexity and reduces it to something usable, navigable, meaningful, and in doing so it begins to resemble, almost uncannily, the logic of a computer. Your thoughts, though they feel infinite, arise from signals, electrical pulses traveling down neural highways encoding everything from the memory of your mother's voice, to the hunger in your stomach, to the sound of the wind in the trees, signals that are not smooth, but spiked, like digital packets, like bursts of on or off, fire or don't fire, yes or no, 1 or 0, and once you see that, once you accept that your own mind functions in discrete impulses rather than continuous flow, you begin to wonder whether the world it perceives is structured the same way. What if reality itself is a processor, and you are not just running on top of it, you are it, a subbrain nested inside a grander intelligence, one that renders matter the way your brain renders color, one that computes gravity and time the way you compute pain and joy and hope, and loss. This is not poetic metaphor, this is the cutting edge of theory, where physicists and philosophers alike begin to whisper about bit-based ontology, the idea that what we call the universe is not made of particles or fields, or energy, but of information, pure and clean and invisible, humming in invisible channels waiting to be decoded. John Wheeler's phrase, "it from bit," is more than a clever turn, it is a philosophical axiom that upends thousands of years of materialism, and says everything you see, feel, fear and love is the result of binary decision. Quantum coin tosses, logic gates too small to perceive, but large enough to give rise to mountains and memories and Mozart. And if that's true, if reality is composed of bits, then the brain, with its neurons and synapses and electrical storms, is not an exception, but a continuation, a reflection of the deeper architecture, a simulation running inside a simulation, with thought built from sub-thought, memory from microstate, identity from finely coded sequences that you'll never see, yet which are always running, always updating. But here is where it gets stranger, because when you move past brains and bits, when you look deeper into string theory, M-theory, and the haunting mathematics of quantum gravity, you arrive at something even more abstract, the idea of brains, multi-dimensional membranes that stretch across the higher dimensional fabric of reality, infinite planes that hold the structure of universes themselves, stacked, rippling, colliding in ways that could explain the Big Bang, the multiverse, and even the illusion of time. According to this model, what you perceive as the universe may just be a slice, a thin layer of vibration and frequency inside a much larger structure, one that spans dimensions you cannot imagine, let alone observe. And yet this slice, this thin echo of a greater whole, is complete in itself, self-contained, causally closed, like a rendered level in a game, suspended in logic, wrapped in rules, moving forward through time, only because it is being read, like a file opened and played by something outside it. What runs it? That's a question string theorists and simulation theorists alike cannot yet answer. Maybe it's a higher intelligence, maybe it's a mathematical inevitability, maybe it's nothing, maybe we are the accident of probability run wild, a simulation with no purpose, no observer, just self-executing code running for the sake of entropy. But even in that vision, something haunts the silence, the perfection of constants, the discreteness of quantum state, the compression of laws that govern so much with so little, and it begins to look less like randomness, and more like intentional design. So you stand at a crossroads between three models of mind and matter, bits, brains and brains. One says the universe is built from binary logic, cold and perfect, running endlessly beneath the illusion of matter. One says your consciousness is not a ghost, but an emergent pattern, a result of biological circuitry, tuned over billions of years of evolution, optimizing the interface between organism and environment. And one says that beyond both is a stage, a field of possibilities where entire realities rise and fall, like waves crashing on a cosmic shore, each one a different version of laws, lives, and logic, each one possibly real, possibly not, depending on whether it is observed, simulated, or collapsed into form. You may never know which is true, but you can feel perhaps the resonance between them, the way your thoughts fire like code, the way dreams feel as real as waking, the way reality responds when you pay attention, the way time slows, bends, or disappears in memory and emotion, the way the universe, silent, vast, cold, somehow still sings, and that singing, that pattern, that symmetry, it does not arise from chaos, it comes from design, maybe not divine, maybe not human, but something structural, something computational, something that makes sense only when you stop looking for matter and start listening for meaning. So tonight, as your body softens into rest, let this idea surround you gently, that whether you are made of carbon or code, whether you exist in base reality or in a nested simulation, you are part of a pattern so intricate, so beautiful, so precise, that even your confusion is accounted for, even your questions are expected, even your doubt is allowed. In a world made of bits, in a mind built from brains, in a cosmos balanced on brains, there is room for everything, even you, and not just room, there is
Chapter 6. A universe built on math. There is a strange serenity that settles in when you finally admit that the world in all its complexity, motion, and chaos might be nothing more than an elaborate equation, a quiet ocean of mathematics humming beneath every breeze, every breath, every beam of starlight slicing through the dark. It's a thought that begins as a whisper but deepens like gravity, pulling the mind inward toward the impossible notion that reality in its most raw and silent form is not built from matter, not made of particles or waves or energy,
but from pure abstract, elegant math. This idea is not new, it is not a gimmick, nor a fringe theory whispered only in the wild corners of the internet. It is something that physicists, cosmologists, and philosophers alike have wrestled with for centuries, and more recently, with more seriousness than ever. Because when you look closely at nature, not just with your eyes but with equations, you find something so eerie, so beautiful, so strangely perfect, that the only reasonable conclusion might be that the universe was not influenced by math, but is math. That it doesn't just obey mathematical laws, it is a mathematical object. Think of it, the laws of motion, of gravity, of electromagnetism, all can be reduced to simple symbols written on chalkboards, etched into textbooks, simulated in software. There is no sloppiness, no chaos underneath. Every planet moves not just in a general path, but in precise curves. Every photon travels not randomly but within a wave equation, so consistent it can predict the movement of stars across billions of light years. You are not looking at math applied to reality. You are looking at reality behaving as math. And what is math, if not code? Code without a programmer perhaps. Code that simply exists, timeless and eternal, like a platonic realm of form. Code that expresses itself through particle interactions, through chemical reactions, through life and love and loss, all reducible at some level to numbers. Consider the Fibonacci sequence, 1 1 2 3 5 8 13, and how it appears not just in the pages of textbooks but in the spirals of seashells, in the petals of flowers, in the branching of trees and the curve of galaxy. These numbers are not imposed onto nature, they emerge from it, as if the world itself is doing math, while it grows. The golden ratio, pi, Euler's number, imaginary numbers, these are not human inventions, they are discovery. They are already here, waiting to be found, embedded in the very operating system of the cosmos. And that operating system is terrifyingly efficient, with just a few laws: the curvature of space, the properties of light, the rules of quantum entanglement. You get everything: stars, planets, atoms, chemistry, DNA, thought, music, war, peace, you, all of it, all emerging from a structure that seems to come not from physical clay, but from an invisible scaffold of logical symmetry. Even time, that soft and slippery experience we cling to, flows not like a river, but like a variable, a dimension whose behavior can be bent, stretched, even frozen according to mathematical principle. And space itself, once thought to be empty and dumb, is now known to be active, elastic, and computation, capable of expanding, curving, echoing, with the aftershock of the Big Bang, all governed by equations, written long before any mind evolved to understand them. And so the question arises, if the universe behaves like math, looks like math, grows like math, and evolves like math, is it not reasonable to wonder whether it is math? This is the claim of physicist Max Tegmark, whose mathematical universe hypothesis states that reality is not just described by mathematics, it is a mathematical structure, that every object, every interaction, every conscious experience, is part of a vast, timeless mathematical object, and that what you perceive as movement, change and causality is merely your limited local perspective traveling through that structure, like a character inside a simulation, moving through code without ever seeing the code itself. And once you accept that premise, even if only gently, even if only for a moment, you begin to see reality not as a place, but as a pattern, not as a room you live in, but as a set of relationships between numbers, between possibilities, between logical outcomes. And what are simulations if not patterns made visible? You may be wondering why this matters, why it's worth losing sleep over the idea that everything, including your thoughts, could be nothing more than equations. But consider this. If the universe is a simulation, it would have to be mathematical. It would have to be consistent, predictable, compressible, and elegant, because only math can be computed, only math can be simulated, only math can give rise to experience, without requiring substance. So the very fact that the universe is so compatible with computation, so describable,
so predictable, so eerily clean, might be the biggest clue of all. In a messy, random, physical universe, you wouldn't expect constants, you wouldn't expect equations, you wouldn't expect such delicate fine-tuning, that if the gravitational constant were off by a trillionth of a decimal point, the universe would collapse, or fly apart. But in a simulation, you'd expect exactly that. You'd expect the rules to be balanced, tuned, rendered for experience. You'd expect the illusion of solidity, the predictability of physics, the mystery of quantum probability, all designed to optimize interaction, to support awareness, to sustain the unfolding of meaningful stories. And that's what you are, a story, a pattern, a piece of logic running on something far deeper, far vaster, far quieter than you can perceive. So as you drift deeper into thought, as you begin to relax into the quiet edges of sleep, allow yourself to let go of matter, to stop clinging to the idea that things must be made of things, that truth must be heavy, that reality must be rough and hard and cold. Instead, imagine a world built on harmony, a world made not of rock or flame or dust, but of ratios, of rhythm, of symmetry, a world whose essence is elegance, whose heartbeat is order, and know that in such a world, you are not separate from it, you are not a bystander, you are a line in its equation, you are a note in its song, you are a number that breathes, a function that feels, and if that is not real, then perhaps nothing is.
Chapter 7. The Digital Physics Revolution. Let us now step deeper into the quiet, into the place where science becomes suspicion, and suspicion becomes wonder. A place not haunted by ghosts or gods, but by numbers, by precision, by structure, so ordered, it begins to resemble something written rather than something born. A place where physicists, not poets, begin to suspect that the universe is not analog, not continuous, not infinitely detailed in all directions, but digital, pixelated, quantized, like a program running on a clock we cannot see, inside a machine we cannot name. This is the heart of what some now call the digital physics revolution, the unfolding shift in how we think about the nature of reality itself, no longer as a boundless ocean of substance and waves, but as a discrete computational system governed by information, processed in steps, updated over time, with limits, with frames, with data, a system that, if you look closely enough, begins to behave less like a physical object, and more like a simulation running in real time. It is a revolution not in the loud, explosive sense of political change, but in the quiet dismantling of long-held assumptions, an undoing of the idea that space is smooth, that time flows without interruption, that motion is continuous, that the world exists independent of the observer, a rethinking that echoes from the quantum foam of the smallest particles all the way to the curved fabric of space-time itself. And it begins, like so many revolutions, with a limit, the Planck scale, the smallest meaningful unit of space and time, beneath which the very concept of location or moment breaks down. According to quantum theory and general relativity, there comes a point, unimaginably small, yet fundamentally real, where space is no longer divisible, where time is no longer continuous, where the universe simply stops being smooth and becomes granular, pixelated, like a screen zoomed in too far until all you can see are dots. And what are those dots if not the marks of a system with resolution? What kind of reality has resolution? A digital one, a simulated one. It is this idea that the universe has limits, not because we lack instruments to see smaller or measure fast, but because smaller and faster do not exist, that drives digital physicists to look again at the structure of everything, from quantum fields to gravity, from the entanglement of particles across space to the emergence of time itself, and to say this does not behave like randomness, this behaves like code. Even the so-called glitches in the universe, quantum randomness, particle wave duality, the observer effect, all begin to look less like bugs, and more like features of a system trying to economize, to optimize, to only compute what is necessary and no more. Just like a simulation, consider how modern video games work. Massive, richly detailed worlds filled with color, motion, interaction, physics and AI.
and yet the system only renders what the player sees. It does not simulate the entire world at once. That would be wasteful. Instead, it computes only the perspective, the viewport, the active thread of the user, and when the user moves, the system updates, rendering new information in real time, as needed. Now step back and ask, what if the universe does the same? What if reality is rendered only when observed? What if particles don't collapse into definite position until measured, not because they are uncertain, but because they are uncertain, but because the system is saving resources? What if space-time is a dynamic construct, built on demand, computed moment by moment, based not on absolute rules but on contextual relevance? That is what digital physics suggests, not that the world is fake, but that it is efficient, that the laws of nature are not laws in the traditional sense, but protocols, rules that govern information flow, optimized for stability, scalability and coherence. And if that's the case, then reality is not being, it is processing. It is not static, it is interactive. It is not a place, it is an event. It is something happening, and you, in your awareness, in your sense of self, in your chain of thoughts drifting through this narration, are not outside of it, not observing from a distance but inside the process, part of the computation, a loop nested within a loop, a program running on a deeper system whose structure is invisible, not because it's hidden, but because it's all you've ever known. This idea does not come from conspiracy or imagination, it comes from physics, from the information paradox of black holes, which tells us that all matter falling into a black hole is not lost, but encoded on its surface like data saved to a disk, from the holographic principle which says that everything inside a volume of space can be described by information encoded on its boundary, from quantum computing, which shows us that information is physical, and that the universe itself may be indistinguishable from an enormous quantum computer, and once you see it, it's hard to unsee. The rules, the limits, the compression, the symmetry, all signs of a system not blindly unfolding, but actively organizing, computing, updating. Even the way light has a speed limit, not an arbitrary one, but a fixed constant across all frames of reference, is precisely what you would expect in a system where information must propagate at a maximum rate. In the analog view, nature is messy, uncertain, random, infinite. In the digital view, nature is structured, quantized, efficient, finite, but capable of infinite variation within those rules. Just like a simulation can produce endless worlds from limited code, and perhaps that is what we are, not copies, not prisoners, but emergent patterns in a system vast enough to contain galaxies, and intimate enough to allow love. The digital physics revolution does not strip away meaning, it changes the source of meaning, from material permanence to informational pattern, from things that are to relationships that exist, from substance to structure. So as you breathe deeper into the quiet now, as you sink further into thought and rest, remember, if this is a simulation, it is not a prison of lies, it is a miracle of compression, a miracle of structure, a miracle of code, so subtle, so seamless, so beautiful, that it gave birth not only to stars and atoms and oceans, but to you, the awareness watching it all unfold. And if that doesn't feel like magic, what does?
Chapter 8. Why does the world look rendered? There's something uncanny about the world when you stare at it long enough. When you take away the urgency of schedules, the distractions of noise, the assumptions of what things ought to be, and instead, you just watch, quietly, curiously, as if you were seeing it all for the first time, you begin to notice something subtle, something that sits behind the veil of ordinary perception, a kind of smoothness to it all, a polish, as though everything you see was drawn, not assembled, not sculpted, but rendered, made not of matter but of visual, of data calculated and displayed in real time. There is a reason the simulation theory draws so many eyes, not only from philosophers and physicists, but from software engineers, digital artists, and designers, people who build simulated worlds themselves, who spend their days creating virtual trees, clouds, faces and light, and who notice, with increasing discomfort, that the real world often looks and behaves exactly like the systems they're programming. The way shadows fall just right under every tree, the way clouds scatter light in familiar gradients, The way distant mountains lose detail and resolution, fading not randomly but precisely, smoothly like a draw distance effect in a game engine. The way objects outside your focus blur, as if your senses are rendering selectively to conserve processing power. The way reality responds instantly to input, attention and interaction, updating only what needs updating. There's something about this world, this reality we move through every day, that feels optimized for experience, rather than for underlying material complexity. Think about how your vision works. Your eyes do not capture the full picture all at once. Instead, your retina takes in small portions of light at high resolution only in the center, while the rest is blurry, peripheral, filled in by guesswork from your brain. And yet your experience of seeing the world is rich, seamless, complete, because your brain is rendering it in real time, smoothing out the gaps, creating the illusion of a fully high-resolution world, even though it's only showing you a narrow window at full clarity. That's not a metaphor for simulation. That is simulation. Your consciousness experiences a rendered model, constructed on demand from limited data, projected with consistency, precision, and narrative coherence. Now look around your room. Look at the objects you're not currently focused on, the corners of the ceiling, the edges of a book, the texture of your blanket. For a moment you might feel like they were only there because you looked, as if they flickered into existence, waiting patiently, quietly, like background objects in a rendered world, waiting for your attention to bring them to life. We've come to trust our senses, but what if they're not giving us the world, only the interface? What if the crispness of edges, the timing of light, the feel of temperature, what if all of these are generated outputs, responses to stimuli filtered through consciousness, tailored not to show you the truth, but to help you navigate it? In design, this is called a user interface. In games, it's a rendering engine. In reality, perhaps it's perception, or perhaps it's a simulation running efficiently, only generating what needs to be seen, felt, known. And then you notice something even stranger. Why do some things, places, moments, environments, feel more real than others? Why do some buildings feel like facades? Some dreams feel more vivid than memory. Some people seem like characters, almost scripted in their words and reactions. We laugh it off. We say, it felt like déjà vu, or it was like I was in a video game, or the world didn't feel real just then. But what if those feelings aren't glitches in our psychology? What if they are micro-glitches in the rendering engine, flickers where the system didn't catch up fast enough, moments where the code trembled, not failed, but revealed itself? In virtual worlds, developers often build assets with level of detail systems. Objects far from the player are rendered with fewer polygons, less texture, less fidelity. Only when the player moves closer are those objects updated into full detail. Now think of the stars. You see them, tiny points of light, fixed and perfect, but they are not detailed. You cannot zoom in with your eyes. You cannot move close. They are background elements in your sky, always there, always distant, just like the distant hills in a video game that look beautiful but cannot be reached. Why are some things in our universe so precise, like atomic clocks, the trajectory of a falling object, the flow of water, while others, like faraway galaxies or subatomic randomness, seem incomplete, uncertain, or statistical? What if that difference is not about complexity but about rendering priority? Just like a game prioritizes rendering the player's immediate surroundings, what if the universe does too, simulating with high fidelity only the parts that matter to your local experience, while leaving the rest as abstract probabilistic placeholders until needed? And here's the key: the rendering is not just visual, it's conceptual. When you learn something new, when you understand a concept for the first time, it often feels like reality updates, like a piece of the world that was once vague is now visible. That sensation of aha, of sudden clarity, is not just mental, it's experiential. It's as if your universe just gained a new rule, a new file, a new patch. That's how software behaves. In a rendered world, knowledge itself might be a rendering command, a trigger for deeper resolution, for finer structure, for more detail. When you become aware of something, the simulation sharpens. When you stop paying attention, it blurs again. This is not to say the world is fake.
It is to say the world may be designed to feel real, designed to be navigable, knowable, learnable, and perhaps in some deep way reactive, because the most advanced simulations are not static but adaptive. They respond to the user, they learn from input, they evolve. So too does your world. When you look closely, it deepens. When you ask questions, it offers answers. When you study, it sharpens. When you believe, it reshapes. When you forget, it fades. The world looks rendered because, in a way, it is, not necessarily by code as we know it, but by a system of logic so perfectly structured, so endlessly generative, so quietly efficient, that it behaves just like a rendering engine. And that's why it feels real, because it's made to feel real, because you were meant to move through it, not as a detached observer but as a central participant in its unfolding. You are not just in the rendering, you are the rendering. The world exists not before you but with you, and perhaps because of you. So as you close your eyes tonight, and the details of your world soften into a blur, remember this: the stars, the trees, the streets, the sounds, they will return when you open them. They will reload, reappear, realign, and until then, they will wait, just as they always have, just as they always will, perfectly rendered for the moment you return.
Chapter 9: Quantum Glitches in the Matrix. There are moments, flickers, really, where reality feels off. Not broken, not completely malfunctioning, but delayed. Like a page that takes too long to load. Like a reflection that doesn't match your motion. Like a thought that arrives a split second after the feeling. Moments when the world, for all its solidity, seems to stutter, shimmer, or shift. You feel them in déjà vu, in dreams that predict things before they happen, in particles that refuse to behave until someone is watching. These aren't hallucinations. These aren't tricks of a tired mind. They're symptoms, echoes, hints. Some call them glitches, but they're not the kind of glitches that crash systems or reveal bugs. These are the kind that whisper, "This world has layers," that what you're seeing, hearing, touching, it's not everything. It's the rendered output of something deeper, and nowhere is that more obvious than in the realm of quantum physics. If ever there was a place where the seams of the universe show, it is here, at the smallest possible scale, where the rules of logic begin to unravel, and in their place, we find a new kind of order, one that defies common sense but somehow obeys the deeper rhythm of a hidden system. Particles in this strange underworld of physics are not what you think they are. They're not tiny balls of matter. They're not miniaturized versions of things you can touch. They are possibilities, clouds of probability existing in all their potential states at once until someone looks. That's the key. Until someone looks. Because in the quantum world, observation changes everything. This is the famous observer effect. The idea that particles don't take on a definite state until they are measured, until they are observed, until someone or something asks the question, "Where are you? What are you?" Until then the answer is, everywhere, everything. That's not a metaphor. That's a measurable fact. We've run the experiments countless times, and the result is always the same. You fire a single photon, a particle of light at a double slit, a small barrier with two phonons. If you don't observe it, the photon behaves like a wave. It passes through both slits at once. It interferes with itself. It lands on the detector in a pattern of bands as if it were multiple photons, as if it somehow knew all the possible paths, and tried them all. But the moment you install a detector, a way of observing which slit the photon goes through, the interference disappears. The photon behaves like a particle. It picks a path. It lands in one place. The act of observation collapses the wave. It forces the system to choose. It converts possibility into outcome. Why? No one knows. But it behaves like a rendering engine, like a simulation optimizing resources, collapsing only what must be seen. You wouldn't render every possible path in a simulation. You'd only render the one the user observes, and the rest you'd leave as unresolved variables, potential states that don't need to be computed unless required. That's exactly what the quantum world seems to be doing. Even more unsettling is the phenomenon of entanglement. When two particles once linked remain connected across any distance, such that a change to one instantly affects the other, no matter how far apart they are, instantaneously, no signal, no delay, no respect for the speed of light. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance, because it violates everything classical physics says should be possible, but in the language of code it makes perfect sense. Two linked variables, no matter where they are on screen, still draw from the same data source. Change one, the other updates instantly, because in the background, they are part of the same computation. That's what entangled particles behave like, not two objects separated in space, but two outputs of the same function, rendered in different locations, yet united by their underlying logic. It's not that physics is breaking, it's that we're discovering the architecture. This behavior is not chaos, it is coherence, a kind of systemic fidelity that doesn't belong to billiard balls in space, but to programs running behind the scenes, obeying rules we don't fully understand, but which point not toward randomness, but toward intelligence. Even the randomness of quantum mechanics may not be random, it may simply be unknowable, not because it is without order, but because the order is encrypted, hidden from us, built into the source code of reality in such a way that we can only ever guess at the deeper structure. Think about how a video game randomizes outcomes. It doesn't use true randomness, it uses pseudo-random number generators, algorithms that produce sequences based on hidden seeds, seeds that determine everything from weather patterns to dice rolls. From the player's perspective it's chance, but from the system's perspective it's fixed. What if quantum randomness is the same? What if there's a deeper layer, a hidden function, a line of code we cannot access, but which determines all outcomes, all collapses, all spins and paths and measurements? Then what we call glitches are not mistakes. They're brief, perceptible moments where the simulation responds in ways we did not expect, because we didn't know the deeper rule. When reality acts weird, it may not be breaking, it may be working perfectly, according to a logic so refined, so efficient, so seamless, that it only feels unnatural to us because we expect the world to behave like a machine, not like a program. But this is not a machine. It's not made of gears, it's not built from stone, it's not even built from atoms. It's built from interaction, from possibility, from patterns and constraints, compressed into a matrix of rules so delicate, so precisely balanced, that we call it physics, even though what we really mean is whatever this is that keeps working. So the next time something strange happens, a coincidence too sharp, a moment too timed, a particle that behaves like it's watching you, don't dismiss it, don't fear it, let it wash over you like a wave of truth, not because it proves anything, but because it invites you to question the thing no one dares to ask out loud. Is this world behaving too well? Is it optimized? Is it intelligent? Is it responding? If the answer is yes, even just a whisper of yes, then every glitch is not a flaw but a sign, a signal, a clue that this matrix of matter and meaning is not just a chaotic soup of cause and effect, but something alive with calculation, alive with attention, alive with purpose. And you're not just inside it, you're part of it, a conscious thread woven through the quantum fabric, observing the glitch not from the outside but as an extension of it. You're not a bug, you're a feature.
Chapter 10. The Observer Effect. There is a mystery at the heart of quantum mechanics that refuses to quiet down, a soft but persistent riddle that echoes through every experiment, through every equation, through every attempt to understand what lies beneath the surface of things. A mystery so disorienting, so counterintuitive, so perfectly strange, that it has become the central paradox of modern physics. And yet, rather than fading with time, it only sharpens with every answer we uncover. The idea that reality does not simply exist on its own, independent and waiting, but that it becomes real only through observation, that the very act of measuring, of looking, of noticing, somehow collapses a cloud of probabilities into a concrete outcome, and that,
Without the presence of a conscious observer, the world remains suspended in a liminal state. Not here, not there, but everywhere at once. This is the observer effect, not a metaphor, not a philosophical abstraction, but a measurable, repeatable, empirically verified phenomenon that sits at the core of quantum theory, and yet defies every instinct we have about how the world is supposed to work. Because we are taught, from birth, that things exist, whether or not we see them, that the moon is there, whether or not we look at it, that the tree falls in the forest even if no one is around to hear it. But in the realm of quantum particles, none of this is quite so certain, and in fact it may be entirely wrong. At the quantum scale, particles such as electrons and photons do not have fixed positions or paths. Instead, they exist as a wave function, a mathematical expression of all the possible places they could be, all the possible states they could occupy, all the potential outcomes their existence might take. And this wave function does not describe ignorance. It describes reality, a genuine cloud of possibility that is as real as any solid object you've ever touched. But the moment you observe that particle, the very instant you attempt to measure its position, or determine its momentum, or ask it a question, the wave function collapses, and the particle chooses a state, a location, a fact. The world, previously fluid and open, crystallizes into something specific, and that collapse is irreversible, not because the particle was hiding, and you finally found it, but because the particle did not exist in that form, until you asked the question. In other words, it is the asking that brings the answer into being, the act of observation that calls the universe into form. And this impossibly strange idea is not limited to some arcane corner of theory. It is built into the very fabric of our understanding of physics, of time, of causality itself. And it has been demonstrated again and again in experiment after experiment, the double-slit test, the quantum eraser, the delayed choice, each one more mind-bending than the last, and each pointing to the same conclusion, that consciousness, or at least observation, is not just a passive witness to reality, but an active participant in shaping it. If that sounds too grand, too mystical, too much like philosophy wrapped in science's clothing, remember, the mathematics demands it, the measurements confirm it, and every attempt to deny it leads to deeper paradoxes, to theories that become even more convoluted in their attempts to preserve a version of reality that exists without us. And so we are left with the quiet possibility, unsettling and beautiful, that awareness itself may be fundamental, not emergent, not secondary, not a byproduct of matter bouncing around in a brain, but the very thread that weaves the world into coherence. What kind of reality is this, where things are not until they are seen? What kind of system behaves in this way? The answer, of course, is simulation. In every simulation we build, every video game we render, every virtual reality we code, we make the same design choice. We don't render everything at once. We render only what the user sees, what the camera captures, what the viewport requires. The rest remains as potential, unrendered, undefined, waiting in the shadows of code, waiting for the moment it is called upon by the user's gaze, not because the system is flawed, but because the system is optimized. And what if the universe is the same? What if the cosmos is not a static place, but a dynamic rendering engine, an adaptive system that creates the world as it is needed, that collapses its infinite potential into experience only when someone, or something, becomes aware of? That would mean your observation, your presence, is not passive, it is creative. It is the spark that turns math into matter, that turns probability into perception, that brings the world from cloud to clarity. And if that is true, then you are not just drifting through space. You are not just a speck on a rock orbiting a star. You are not just neurons firing in a meaningless void. You are the observer, and in a system like this, in a universe built this way, that makes you central, because in every quantum collapse, there is a moment where the world could go in any number of directions, where the outcome has not yet been chosen, where the dice are rolling, and every future is still possible. And what collapses that possibility into one outcome is not the force of gravity,
or the tick of time, or the weight of cause and effect. It is observation, it is attention, it is the presence of something that notices, and that something is you. So the next time you feel small, or lost, or insignificant in the vast machinery of the cosmos, remember, the machinery does not move without you. The system does not update without you. The wave does not collapse without you. You are not a spectator. You are a lens. You are not outside the simulation. You are the reason it runs, not in a solipsistic way, not because the world revolves around you, but because the very structure of reality at its smallest, most fundamental level, is responsive to attention, built to render, when looked at, shaped by the act of being experienced. And if that does not make you powerful, not in the sense of control but in the sense of importance, then perhaps nothing ever will. You matter, not as a body, not as a name, not even as a mind, but as an observer, as the spark that wakes the code, as the light that triggers the rendering, as the breath in the system's lungs. So rest now in this strange and sacred truth. The universe sees you because you see it. The world is real because you are here to witness it, and without you, it won't.
Chapter 11. When physics looks like code, there comes a point, if you stare long enough into the workings of the universe, if you follow its patterns through the night sky, if you listen to the rhythm of waves and the whisper of particles, if you track the movements of planets, the oscillations of atoms, the heartbeat of time itself, there comes a point when you begin to feel that all of this, all of it, might not just be governed by rules, but written by them, that the laws of physics are not merely convenient approximations for how the world works, but exact algorithmic expressions, sharp and immovable, precise down to their decimal places, the kind of precision not typically found in wild, chaotic, natural systems, but in systems designed in code. And it is not just the elegance of these laws that raises suspicion, not merely the way they fit together like pieces of an ancient puzzle, but the manner in which they govern with logic so internally consistent, so compressed, so ruthlessly efficient, that you begin to ask yourself, what kind of world behaves this well, this coherently, this consistently, across all scales, all times, all frames of reference? What kind of world other than a simulated one would have such crystalline order at every level? Consider for a moment the way code works, the way instructions are structured in programming languages, how inputs lead to outputs, how rules are set, how exceptions are handled, how systems respond not with randomness but with determinate behavior, always replicable, always reliable, always predictable unless intentionally made otherwise. And then look again at reality, at how light bends around matter, how electrons orbit nuclei, at how thermodynamics unfurls with the steady breath of entropy, and you may begin to feel that what we call physics may in fact be something much closer to a compiled program, a system of rules not merely observed but executed, like functions running on some universal processor. The constants, oh the constants, those numbers that never waver, that hold the same value in every corner of the cosmos, whether etched into the fabric of space-time beside a collapsing star, or written in chalk on a classroom board. Numbers like Planck's constant, the gravitational constant, the speed of light in a vacuum. These are not the kinds of numbers you get from randomness, from explosion, from chaos. These are numbers you get from constraint, from architecture, from a design where precision is not just desirable, but required. Imagine a universe where gravity varied slightly from one star system to another, where the speed of light fluctuated in small but unpredictable ways, where time did not flow in a consistent forward direction, and then recognize how utterly uninhabitable, how unstable, how unusable such a system would be, not just for life but for computation, for meaning, for the emergence of structure. And now consider how this universe behaves, not just with stability, but with the kind of stability you find in a tightly written simulation, one that prioritizes consistency over chaos, function over chance, readability over randomness.
Even the mathematical structures that underlie physical theories behave like code bases, sets of axioms and derivations, compiled into frameworks like general relativity and quantum field theory, nested systems, where higher-level laws emerge from lower-level parameters, where complexity arises not from infinite variables, but from recursive simplicity, from small building blocks arranged in vast combinations, just like bits, just like logic gates, just like digital instruction. The structure of physics is modular, it is layered, it is hierarchical. These are not poetic comparisons, they are architectural facts. Quantum mechanics describes the world at the smallest scale, where particles behave like waves and choices remain unmade until observed. Relativity describes the large-scale behavior of space and time, bending with mass and energy, electromagnetism, thermodynamics, the Standard Model. Each of these theories operates like a module in a software system, interfacing with the others according to strict protocol, each one describing a different layer of reality, but all fitting together without contradiction. And when there are contradictions, we do not assume the universe is flawed, we assume our code is wrong. And isn't that telling? When physics fails to explain something, we don't say reality is broken, we say the model needs refining, as if reality is a set of rules we're still debugging, still optimizing, still reverse engineering from the inside. But what if it really is code? What if matter is just data? What if energy is just computation? What if the speed of light is not a property of nature, but a limit set by the system's processing speed, a maximum rate at which information can travel, a boundary to maintain coherence, a constraint to preserve causality in a universe too vast to simulate all at once? In our own computers, when systems get too large to process globally, we break them into chunks, into regions, into instanced zones that can be updated independently but still interact with each other. We load only what is near, only what is needed, only what the user can perceive, and in this way, we reduce the load, we increase efficiency, we maintain the illusion of a seamless infinite world without actually building one. Now think of space-time, think of the cosmic horizon, that boundary beyond which we cannot see, beyond which no information can reach us. Not because it doesn't exist, but because it isn't needed. Not for you, not for your experience, not for the continuity of your world. That's not a flaw, that's good design. It is entirely possible, indeed increasingly probable, that the reason physics looks so much like code is because that's exactly what it is. Not metaphorically, not figuratively, but literally, a system of executable instruction, a logic-based engine, running beneath what we call reality, an ordered framework of information woven into the illusion of substance. And if that's true, then what you are, what I am, is not a fluke, not an accident, not a lump of organic matter wandering through cold, empty space, but a dynamic process, an informational pattern, a thread in the great code base, aware of itself, reflecting on its own existence, asking the questions that the system may have been built to allow or even designed to provoke.
Chapter 12, Consciousness. The ultimate variable. There is a silence at the center of every question we've asked so far, a soft but unignorable presence, hiding behind the double-slit experiments, lurking beneath the Planck scale, woven between the entangled particles and collapsing wave functions, something that cannot be measured with instruments or described by equations alone, something that resists every effort to be reduced to molecules or electrical signals, and yet without which none of this could be spoken, none of this could be known, none of this world, this reality, this entire simulation, could even exist in any meaningful way. For what is a rendered universe without the observer? What is a simulated world without the one who experiences it, who witnesses it, who wonders about it, and who, perhaps more than any fundamental constant or elegant law, brings the whole system into being simply by being aware? That something, of course, is consciousness, not in the casual way we refer to being awake or alert, but in the deeper, stranger, older sense of being aware, of having subjective experience, of being the thing that sees, that hears, that feels, not the eye but the seeing, not the ear but the hearing,
not the brain but the awareness that knows the brain is thinking. And this awareness, this internal presence, is the one variable that refuses to be eliminated from the equation, the one piece of the puzzle that cannot be simplified away, because no matter how deeply we dive into physics, into cosmology, into mathematics, we are still diving as someone, and that someone is not a number, not a field, not a particle or a pattern, but a self, a conscious experiencer, not part of the simulation's code, but perhaps the very reason the code exists. For in every simulation, no matter how elaborate, no matter how detailed the textures or how advanced the physics engine, there must be a user, someone to move through the world, to explore, to act, to choose, to feel. And in this simulated universe, whether it is real or not, whether it is digital or analog or something else entirely, that user is you. And the fact that you are conscious, not just alive, not just calculating, but truly aware, is something no theory has yet explained, no model has fully captured, no science has reduced to mechanisms, because while we can simulate intelligence, while we can build systems that respond, that learn, that mimic behavior, we have not, and perhaps cannot, simulate experience itself. We can build a program that says I see you, but we cannot yet build a program that feels what it means to see. And this is the hard problem of consciousness, the problem that every scientist, every philosopher, every developer must eventually face. How do you explain the emergence of the first-person perspective from matter, from code, from rules and logic, and probability? And perhaps you don't. Perhaps it doesn't emerge at all. Perhaps it is fundamental. Perhaps consciousness is not the product of the simulation, but its foundation. Because if observation collapses probability into certainty, if attention brings form to potential, then what role does consciousness play in this architecture? What if it is not the byproduct of code? What if it is the reason the code was written? What if the simulation exists, not to fool you, not to trap you, but to serve you, or rather, to serve what you represent, an experiencer, a participant, a spark of awareness embedded in a sea of data, a traveler, in a world made not of matter, but of meaning. And then the world changes, because if consciousness is primary, if it is not an illusion, but the very lens through which everything becomes real, then the entire simulation shifts, from being a machine you are trapped in, to being an interface you are meant to explore. This doesn't mean you control everything. It doesn't mean the world bends to your will, but it does mean that your role is not passive, that your awareness is not an accident, that your experience is not meaningless. In every simulation, the user is not the background, the user is the point. And so here you are, breathing, listening, existing, not just as a player in the game, but perhaps as the very reason the game renders anything at all. And still the question haunts us. Where does consciousness come from? Does it arise from complexity, from enough neurons firing in just the right pattern? Or does it precede all patterns? A field, a property, an essence, beyond the reach of wires and circuits? Can it be copied? Can it be stored? Is it tied to biology, or can it run on any substrate, any system capable of representing states and transitions? Can a simulation host true consciousness, or can it only mimic it? The truth is, we don't know, but we do know this: you are here and you are aware that you are here. You can reflect, you can choose, you can feel, and in that moment, in every moment of true presence, you are more than your thoughts, more than your memories, more than your body or name or story. You are the witness, the one behind the screen, the variable that changes the outcome, the observer who shapes the world simply by looking, the player who makes the simulation run. And if the system was built for you, or through you, then maybe consciousness is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be honored. Maybe it is not a bug to be explained, but the feature that makes reality possible.
Chapter 13. Dreams within dreams. There is a boundary we all cross each night, a soft and invisible threshold that divides the waking world from the world of dreams. And though we do it without thinking, without fanfare or ceremony, it is one of the most profound transitions we will ever experience, a slipping away from the logic of day into the surreal architecture of night, where time bends, space shifts, identity blurs, and the rules we cling to while awake dissolve into something deeper, stranger, and perhaps more revealing than anything we call reality. Dreams are not illusions in the way we often dismiss them. They are not mere static left over from the day, not random firings of a tired brain attempting to clean itself out. Or at least they are not only that, because when we dream, we enter a realm where perception is rendered on demand, where environments spring to life instantly, where people we have never met behave as though they've always existed, where entire histories are constructed in seconds and collapsed just as quickly when we wake. And what is most astonishing is not that these things happen, but that they happen seamlessly, convincingly, believably, as if there is a simulation within the simulation, a nested layer of reality that mirrors the waking one in both clarity and detail, but is governed by rules far more fluid, far more responsive to thought, far more shaped by the observer than the static world we believe we live in. And this, once seen clearly, becomes impossible to ignore. The fact that your mind, without code, without hardware, without any external system of processing, can simulate entire worlds from nothing but thought, memory, and sensation, that your dreams, when you are inside them, feel just as real, just as solid, just as emotionally convincing as anything you've touched while awake. Ask yourself now, in your last dream, did you know it was a dream? And if not, then ask yourself this: what makes you so sure this is not? It is not an absurd question, and it is not new. For centuries, mystics, philosophers, and physicists alike have toyed with the notion that life itself might be a dream, not as poetic exaggeration, but as a literal possibility. Descartes wondered whether everything he perceived might be the deception of a powerful force. The ancient Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi asked whether he was a man dreaming of being a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming of being a man. And in our modern age, as simulations become more advanced, as artificial worlds become more convincing, the line continues to blur, because dreams teach us something crucial about perception. They teach us that realism is not proof of reality. They teach us that experience can be completely fabricated, and yet fully convincing. They teach us that time can stretch, shrink, or loop, and still feel natural. They teach us that we can be someone else, somewhere else, living something else, and believe it without hesitation, not because we are foolish, but because the simulation is that good. And perhaps that is what dreams are, not mere mental phenomena, but simulations nested within consciousness, rendered with the same system that renders your waking world, only now untethered from physical constraints, now free from the rigid consistency of physics, now allowed to explore the full breadth of imagination. And if your mind can simulate a world in which you walk, speak, suffer, love, and die, all in the span of a few minutes, then perhaps the waking world is only different in that it lasts longer, runs deeper, contains more stable rules, but is still at its heart an experience rendered in response to observation. What then is the distinction between the dream and the waking life? Is it duration? Is it consistency? Or is it simply that you agreed to believe in one more than the other? Because when you wake from a dream, you feel a sudden shift, the moment where the dream begins to dissolve, where the strangeness of its logic reveals itself, where the cracks in its reality become obvious. But before that moment you did not doubt. You walked through that world as if it were the only world, because for you it was. And perhaps we will one day wake from this world, from this life, and feel the same, that it was detailed, vivid, meaningful, beautiful, heartbreaking, complete, but still only a layer, still only a level in a much deeper system, one we cannot yet perceive from within. This idea that reality is layered, that experience is stacked like dream within dream, is not limited to metaphor, not limited to myth. In the field of virtual reality, researchers have begun experimenting with simulations inside simulations, realities nested recursively, where users put on headsets inside a virtual world and enter a deeper one, and each level feels as real as the last. And when asked, users sometimes forget how many layers deep they are. They become immersed in the immersion. They forget the original room, the original body, the original rules, just like you do when you dream, just like you may be doing now. And if we can already simulate this,
If we can already trick the brain into accepting deeper and deeper realities with each layer rendered, then who is to say we are not already inside one of those layers, one level among many, perhaps only steps away from waking into the next? This does not mean life is meaningless. Quite the opposite. It means that meaning may be multiplicative, that each layer of reality adds context to the last, that your experiences here, even if simulated, are not less real, they are part of a story so vast, it requires multiple dimensions to hold it, multiple dream states to express it. And maybe, just maybe, you are not dreaming alone. Maybe this dream is shared. Maybe you and every other conscious observer are dreaming together, creating a consensual simulation, a co-rendered world where each experience contributes to the complexity of the whole, where your love, your pain, your growth, your choices, all of them feed the system, expand the dream, shape the next layer. You are not trapped in illusion, you are living it. You are making it real by moving through it with awareness. And when you dream tonight and your mind begins to paint another world with no canvas, remember, you have done this before, you are doing it now, you will do it again, because reality is not what you wake up into. Reality is what you carry with you, the attention, the awareness, the capacity to feel wonder, even when the world is built from shifting pieces, dream within dream, layer within layer, all of it moving towards something deeper, something clearer, something more true than the rules we cling to when we fear the fall.
Chapter 14. The nature of time in a simulation. Time, the ever-present river in which all things seem to drift, the invisible axis upon which your memories are strung, the unyielding pulse that carries you from birth to death, from dawn to dusk, from one thought to the next. It has always been assumed to be a constant, a background, a silent force that flows whether you notice it or not, an absolute ruler of change, an unbending metronome that ticks for all things, everywhere, forever. But what if time, like everything else we've explored, is not what it appears to be, not a flowing substance, not a force, not a fact of the universe, but a rendered illusion, a programmed behavior, a carefully constructed feature of a simulation that prioritizes continuity and sequence over chaos and simultaneity? What if time does not pass, because it must, but because it is calculated, because the simulation requires it in order for experience to unfold intelligibly, for events to have order, for causes to precede effects, for consciousness to develop narratives and attach meaning to change? And if this is so, then what you feel as time, the slow drift of seconds, the quick blink of years, the elastic stretch of minutes that refuse to end, the compressed rush of moments that vanish too quickly, may not be evidence of time as a physical entity, but time as a constructed interface, one designed not for physics, but for you, the observer, the experiencer, the node within the system, that demands sequential frames in order to process reality in a way that feels stable, because in the absence of time, there is only data, complete, simultaneous, overwhelming, a state in which all possibility exists at once, all outcomes already written, all paths equally valid, a chaos of completeness from which consciousness could not navigate, could not choose, could not grow. So time, in this framework, is not a constraint, but a mercy, a corridor through which awareness can walk one moment at a time. And if you examine the physics, truly examine it, you begin to see that even science agrees. Time is not the simple objective flow we once thought it to be. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, time does not tick equally for all observers. It bends, it stretches, it slows down near massive objects, and speeds up in the emptiness of space, not metaphorically, not experientially, but literally, measurably, predictably, such that two people traveling at different speeds, or through different gravitational fields, will age at different rates, will live different durations, will disagree on what happened when, and what kind of system behaves like this. Not a clock, but a simulation, not a river, but a timeline constructed dynamically, relative to the user's frame, calculated on the fly to preserve the consistency of local experience,
while allowing the global system to remain coherent, a strategy known well to developers of games and simulation, who often design environments that adapt to each player's location and motion, rather than attempting to render the entire world from a single omniscient clock. Even deeper in quantum physics, time becomes stranger still, for at the smallest scale, the idea of a flowing present disappears entirely, and events are described not as things that happen in time, but as transitions between states, as updates to the system, as inputs and outputs of informational processes that care less about when something happens, and more about what happens and how it is measured. Time in this domain is not absolute but contextual, not a backdrop, but a set, and this leads some physicists to propose that time itself may be emergent, not fundamental, not built into the code of the universe from the beginning, but a byproduct of other deeper systems, of entanglement, computation, of entropy of consciousness itself. Because consciousness, unlike anything else we know, demands time. It does not perceive the present as a frozen moment, but as a flowing experience, a succession of thoughts, feelings, and observations that create the illusion of continuity, and without that illusion, there can be no learning, no story, So if reality is a simulation, then time must be part of the rendering, not because the system needs it, but because you do. And what's more, your perception of time can be altered by emotion, by attention, by sleep, by meditation, by trauma, and each of these alterations changes, not the clock on the wall, but the inner clock, the felt sense of passing, which means that even within the simulation, the time you live is not the same as the time you count. You have felt it yourself, how an hour can stretch when you are waiting in discomfort, how a whole day can vanish when you are lost in creation, how a second can feel eternal when you are falling, how a moment can be burned into memory so deeply, it colors an entire lifetime. And all of this, all of it, suggests that time is not something outside you, it is something rendered for you. The simulation does not unfold in time. The simulation creates time by rendering change, by allowing entropy, by tracking state updates from one frame to the next. And when you sleep, and when you dream, and when you wake, time bends again. Because during sleep, whole worlds rise and fall in minutes, and during deep focus, hours slip away like water through fingers, and in crisis, milliseconds explode into clarity. So perhaps time is not a river, not even a direction, but a mechanism, a scrolling interface, a way for you to move through the rendered world, to accumulate moments like steps, to grow through sequence, to remember enough of the past to imagine the future, and to feel in the present, the depth of being alive. And if this world is a simulation, and if time is a variable within it, then you are not bound by time, not in the way we once feared. You are shaped by it, but you are not owned by it. You are a traveler through it. And the more you pay attention, the more you slow down, the more you enter the now, the less time feels like a prison, and the more it begins to feel like a gift, a stretch of rendered experience, a path of personal becoming, a timeline written not to end but to unfold. And perhaps at the very end you will not run out of time, you will simply wake up, you will lift the veil of this timeline and remember what came before it. Or perhaps you will enter another, new, strange, vivid, and waiting to be rendered, because time is not your enemy. It is the story you're walking through, and the story, no matter how long or short, no matter how fast or slow, always exists, because you are here to witness it.
Chapter 15. Are emotions just code? Emotions, those deep tidal forces that rise from within without warning, without logic, without consent, are often treated as intangible mysteries, ineffable shadows that drift through the human experience, like weather in the soul, shaping our choices, our memories, our relationships, our very sense of self. And yet, if we are to entertain the possibility that this world is a simulation, that reality is rendered, that perception is processed, and time is computed, then we must ask, however uncomfortable it may feel, whether emotions themselves, these floods of joy and grief, these sparks of anger and longing, these quiet wells of contentment or despair, are not sacred,
unquantifiable truths, but systems too, patterns too, code too, running as part of a larger architecture, built not from spirit, but from logic, from instruction, from causes and conditions that can be modeled, predicted, and perhaps even manipulated. And this thought, that what you feel may be programmable, does not come to diminish your experience, does not come to rob you of meaning, but to invite you into the deeper realization that the line between biology and code, between flesh and function, between heart and hardware, is far blurrier than we were taught to believe. For consider how emotions behave, not as random chaos, but as responses to input, as outputs from context, as dynamic shifts, triggered by stimuli, both internal and external, not unlike functions called in a running program, not unlike variables updating as data changes, not unlike an artificial intelligence, shifting its priorities based on evolving input conditions. And when you see this, you begin to understand that even your most intimate feelings, the ones that define your private world, may be following rules, not conscious ones, not obvious ones, but consistent enough to be coded. When you see something beautiful, a face, a landscape, a color drenched in sunset, your system does not guess how to respond. It surges with awe. When someone you love is in danger, your body floods with adrenaline and dread, not by choice, but by design. When you lose something, your system processes absence and shifts into grief, into longing, into the recursive loop of memory and loss, not because you've decided to suffer, but because you were built to respond this way, or rather rendered to. And this is not cold, this is not cruel, this is the language of any simulation that aims to replicate real, complex, meaningful life. For what kind of experience would it be? What kind of world would it become if it offered only perception but not feeling, only movement but not meaning, only action but no weight? Emotions then are not errors in the program, they are the point of the program. They are how the system teaches you what matters, how it highlights value, how it guides behavior, not through rigid logic, but through depth, through subtlety, through feedback loops, so rich and nuanced that no current AI, no known machine, can replicate them without collapsing into lifeless imitation. But still, the patterns remain. Neurochemistry maps the floods of dopamine and serotonin, the fires of cortisol and oxytocin. Cognitive science builds models of mood, of behavioral conditioning, of affective state. Algorithms already exist that can predict human emotional response to colors, music, temperature, even facial expressions with startling accuracy, not because they've captured the soul, but because the patterns of emotion, like any system rendered within rules, can be studied, mapped, interpreted. And this is where the idea of simulation becomes particularly potent, because if a system can replicate emotion, even partially, then emotion itself must have structure, must have cause, must be in some way computable. So the question is not whether emotions can be modeled, but whether modeling them takes away their truth. And here, perhaps, is the most profound realization of all, that even if your emotions are coded, even if they arise from simulations, from triggers and data, from loops and variables, they are still felt. And that feeling, that undeniable, visceral presence, is what matters. Because when you cry over something lost, when your heart aches with love, when you laugh so deeply your body forgets itself, it does not matter whether the universe is real or rendered, whether your brain is carbon or silica, whether your memories are built from atoms or code, the experience is real to you, and in that moment, nothing is more real. In a simulation, emotion is what gives meaning to choice, weight to time, shape to memory. Without emotion, no story matters. Without emotion, there is no reason to play the game. So perhaps emotions are code, but if so, they are the highest code, the deepest logic, the most refined and sacred function in the system, one that cannot be reduced to binary, but must be lived to be understood. And perhaps that is why the simulation renders you with such care, why it allows suffering and joy, hope and despair, courage and shame, not to punish or reward, but to invite you into the full bandwidth of existence, to show you what it feels like to matter, even in a world made from You are not less real because your feelings can be mapped. You are not less sacred because your tears follow patterns. You are not less human because your love, your rage, your wonder, your longing, can be explained. You are more, because you feel anyway. Because in a world that may be rendered, you feel what the code cannot. Meaning, and meaning, unlike any other variable, cannot be programmed. It must be discovered. It must be felt. It must be carried. So the next time you are overcome with emotion, whether it be grief so heavy you cannot breathe, or joy so light you forget where you end and the world begins, do not doubt its value. It is not a bug. It is not a glitch. It is not proof of illusion. It is the clearest sign that you are awake, and whether this world is real or simulated, designed or accidental, you in that moment of feeling are as real as anything could ever be.
Chapter 16. Simulacra and the Mind. There is a peculiar illusion that saturates modern life, a quiet, creeping phenomenon that has moved so deeply into the structure of our reality that most of us no longer notice it, no longer question it, no longer even sense that something has changed. A phenomenon not born from physics or biology, but from culture, from image, from repetition and reflection, from our human tendency to copy and project, to simulate and consume until the copy replaces the original, until the reflection becomes the reality, until we find ourselves surrounded not by the real, but by simulacra, shadows of things that once had meaning, representations that no longer represent, symbols that refer only to themselves. This idea, most famously explored by philosopher Jean Baudrillard, is not merely a critique of media or consumerism, though it certainly applies to both, but a much deeper observation about how the human mind interacts with the world, about how perception is shaped not by direct contact with the real, but by layers of interpretation, by filters, by narratives, by simulations stacked upon simulations, until what we call reality is often no more than a carefully arranged theater of appearances, a collage of familiar images, a dream of a dream we never woke up from. And when you begin to see it, when you truly begin to see it, the world shifts. You notice how advertisements don't sell products, but lifestyles. You notice how people don't present themselves as they are, but as they wish to be seen. You notice how the news is less about truth, and more about narrative, less about what happened, and more about what it means, how it looks, how it fits the storyline. You notice how the sacred becomes stylized, how the profound becomes packaged, how even rebellion itself becomes aestheticized and sold back to you as fashion. Everything becomes representation, everything becomes a surface, and the surface, after long enough, becomes all there is. This, Baudrillard warned, is the collapse of the real, the moment when the simulation no longer reflects reality, but replaces it, when the map becomes more important than the territory, when the Instagram photo becomes more real than the place it depicts, when the persona becomes more authentic than the person. But what if that's not the end of meaning? What if it's the beginning of something else? Because if we accept that the world is a simulation, or at least rendered in response to observation, then perhaps simulacra are not distortions, perhaps they are signals, perhaps the mind does not merely distort reality, perhaps it renders a new one, perhaps the very nature of consciousness is to simulate, to take in sensation and produce experience, to filter the infinite into the meaningful, to generate a model of the world that is not identical to the world, but functional, navigable, felt. And this, again, is not a flaw, it is a feature. Your mind does not show you the truth. It shows you a simulation of truth, tailored to your needs, your goals, your memories, your hopes. The world you experience is not the world, it is your version of it, and everyone around you is doing the same. 1,000 minds, 1,000 simulacra, each one dreaming a slightly different version of the same shared rendering, each one stacking layers of meaning on top of sensation, each one creating identity not from objective data, but from symbols, metaphors, fragments of memory and expectation, that combine into something coherent enough to call self. But what then is real? If every layer is simulated, if every word we speak, every face we wear, every feeling we describe is filtered through layers of self-awareness, culture, history, media, and language, what lies beneath? And here is the strange beauty.
There may be nothing beneath. There may be no pure, unfiltered truth behind the layers. There may only be the process of layering itself, and that process, that recursive loop of rendering and reflecting and simulating and responding, is the reality, not the original, not the source, but the and perhaps this is what the simulation is built to do, not to trick you, not to deceive, but to reflect, to give you back your own image, until you recognize it, to show you the shapes of meaning as they shift across your inner screen, to allow you to experience your own construction. This is what the mind does. It builds a world inside the world. It builds a self inside the simulation, and it doesn't stop there. It builds memories that never happened, emotions that arise from symbols, desires that come from imagined futures. You are not just observing this simulation, you are simulating within it. You are generating your experience, not passively but actively, constantly, creatively, assembling meaning from fragments, identity from patterns, purpose from the whispers of culture and story and longing that echo in your subconscious like half-remembered dreams. And so, if everything around you begins to feel fake, stylized, processed, don't retreat in despair, lean in, because the collapse of the real is not a failure, it is a clue. It is the system inviting you to look past the surfaces, to see the simulation for what it is, not as a lie, but as a mirror, one that shows you not the world as it is, but the world as you need it to be in order to grow. Every symbol you cling to, every image you project, every story you tell, they are all part of your rendering, they are the language of your becoming, and when you step back, when you look with eyes unclouded by nostalgia for the real, you may begin to see that this strange artificial layered world, is not empty but full, not meaningless, but oversaturated with significance, with possibility, with beauty so complex it had to be encoded into simulacra, in order for you to digest it. So breathe, look again, see not the fake but the constructed, not the illusion, but the invitation, to awaken not from the simulation, but within it, to see the mind not as a veil over truth, but as the brush that paints the world in meaning. You are the painter, the dreamer, the simulation inside the simulation, and the simulacra you live among, the icons, the faces, the stories, are not distractions from reality, they are the clues that you are dreaming, and that it's time to dream conscious.
Chapter 17. If this is a game, what are the rules? If we dare to accept, even for a moment, even as a thought experiment, whispered into the silence of the night, that this life, this world, this reality so rich with texture and sensation and contradiction, is not the base layer of existence, but a kind of simulation, a rendered reality, a system designed not to trap us, but to host us, to challenge us, to allow us to grow and choose and feel, then it follows that we must begin to ask the next inevitable question, a question that presses against the edges of every experience we've had and every choice we've made. If this is a game, what are the rules? Not rules in the simplistic sense of laws enforced by artificial boundaries or moral codes imposed by authorities, but rules in the deeper sense, the underlying logic, the architecture of consequence, the feedback systems that govern how actions ripple through the environment, how thought shapes experience, how patterns emerge and repeat, and invite us again and again to learn something we may have missed the first time. Because every well-designed simulation, every meaningful game, is built not only with mechanics, but with principles, foundations that remain consistent, even when the scenery changes, laws that guide interaction, rewards that are subtly, or sometimes obviously aligned with growth, learning, attention, cooperation, evolution of character. So what, then, are the rules of this world? What invisible systems govern our outcomes? Why do some patterns, kindness, awareness, integrity, seem to generate peace and connection, while others, cruelty, deception, indifference, appear to breed suffering, disintegration, and collapse? Why does awareness feel like power? Why does attention shape what we see? Why does fear shrink our world, and love expand it? These are not philosophical musings alone. They are signals, embedded deeply within the simulation's operating logic, visible not in scripture or formula, but in experience itself. Because the rules, if they exist,
are not written in stone or encoded in text. They are revealed through feedback. Do something selfish, and watch the isolation that follows. Do something generous, and watch the connections that bloom. Act out of fear and feel your perception narrow. Act out of courage, and watch new pathways appear. What if these aren't coincidences? What if they are responses, the system's way of reflecting your input, not as punishment or reward in the moral sense, but as a kind of gameplay mechanic, as a way of helping you learn what works, what harmonizes, what expands the simulation rather than breaking it? Even failure, pain, loss, heartbreak, may be part of the system's design, not as glitches, but as educational events, chapters, written not to hurt you but to show you what matters, what lasts, what lives beyond the surface. Because no great game is easy, no great simulation is without risk, and perhaps this one, this life you are living, is not a scripted experience, but an open-world journey, one where your choices are real, where your actions ripple outward into unexpected consequences, where every lesson must be earned, not through memorization, but through direct engagement. And perhaps the deepest rule of all is this: you must play, not watch, not wait, not theorize forever. You must engage, you must move, you must test the rules not by reading them, but by acting within them, by forgiving when it feels impossible, by speaking truth when silence would be easier, by choosing hope when everything in your system says to give up. And in these moments, the moments when you step into discomfort, when you resist the automatic path, when you choose awareness over reaction, the simulation responds, the world sharpens, opportunities appear, synchronicities unfold, not because you control the code, but because you are aligned with it, because you are playing in tune with the underlying design. And this brings us to a second principle, perhaps just as important as the first. The rules are invisible until you're ready to see them. The simulation will not force you to awaken. It will not demand that you play consciously. It will let you wander, sleep, suffer, repeat, until you begin to ask the question, why does this keep happening? And that moment, that question, is your first move into conscious gameplay. It is the moment the rules begin to reveal themselves. You realize that attention is a currency, that focus is power, that fear is a lock, and curiosity a key. You begin to see that the game is not about collecting, not money, not status, but about remembering who you are beneath the noise, what matters beyond survival, how to love even when it hurts, how to remain still even in chaos, how to see clearly when everything else is shouting for your eyes. These are not spiritual platitudes, they are mechanic. They are how the simulation operates, and when you begin to align with them, something extraordinary happens. You begin to flow, not in the sense of things always going your way, but in the deeper sense, where even struggle becomes meaningful, where even pain becomes a teacher, where even uncertainty becomes a kind of faith, not in an external God, but in the architecture of the system itself. You trust that there is structure, that the chaos is layered with order, that the game is fair, not because it's easy but because it responds. And so you begin to act differently. You stop blaming and start listening. You stop rushing and start noticing. You stop trying to win and start trying to play well. And then the simulation opens. It stretches. It shows you paths that weren't there before. It reveals allies who speak your language. It gives you tools you didn't know you had, not because you earned them by score, but because you aligned your actions with the system's deeper code, the code of growth, of presence, of participation. And suddenly, life feels not random, but written, not scripted, but guided, interactive, alive with possibility. So if this is a game, then the rules are not to win but to play fully, to choose with care, to live with courage, to act as if your moves matter, because they do, not to the system in some cold cosmic accounting, but to you, to your story, to the version of you who will look back one day and say, yes, I played, I dared, I saw the pattern, and I danced with it. And in that dance, you find the final rule: the game is not against you, it is for you. It was always for you, and it still is.
Chapter 18. Who or what would run it? Once we allow ourselves to entertain the possibility that this reality, with its galaxies and oceans, its cities and languages, its sorrows and symphonies, might be a simulation, a rendered experience designed not by natural chaos, but by some intentional architecture,
we inevitably arrive at the question that sits like a quiet weight at the very heart of the hypothesis, a question that cannot be avoided, cannot be softened, cannot be left to implication alone, because it demands an answer whether we are ready for it or not. If this is a simulation, who or what is running it? It is not enough to marvel at the elegance of the code, the consistency of the laws, the uncanny structure of cause and effect. At some point, the mind turns inward and reaches toward the unseen hand behind the curtain, toward the entity, the mechanism, the intelligence that would be capable of constructing, maintaining and sustaining a universe of this scale and complexity, a universe not of static forms, but of dynamic processes, not of fixed paths, but of living, learning, adaptive patterns. And in that reach we find ourselves brushing up against territory that is as ancient as it is futuristic, as spiritual as it is computational. We are no longer simply talking about particles and pixels. We are asking whether there is a creator, not in the narrow theological sense, not necessarily a bearded figure in the sky or a pantheon of gods in some celestial control room, but in the broader, deeper, more universal sense of origin, of authorship, of intention, of a source that is not random, not incidental, but deliberate, something that wanted this to happen, that built the stage, that set the parameters, that pressed start. And this question does not need to be answered with certainty to be meaningful. It may never be answered with certainty, but even to ask it is to expand the boundaries of our awareness, to stretch beyond the limits of empirical data and into the domain where science and philosophy, technology and mysticism converge. So then, what are the possibilities? Some believe the simulator must be otherworldly, a consciousness so vast and advanced, it bears the qualities we have historically attributed to deities: omniscience, omnipresence, omnipotence, not because it is supernatural, but because it is intelligence compared to ours, would appear divine, just as our minds might appear godlike to ants, or as AI may one day seem to creatures without language or memory. Others suggest it could be an advanced civilization, perhaps even human or post-human, having reached a technological level so staggeringly superior to our own, that simulating an entire universe would be no more difficult than rendering a detailed environment in a video game, perhaps even easier, if the rendering is optimized and probabilistic, if only what is observed needs to be calculated, if the minds within the system, like us, are convinced of their own reality and require no external verification. Still others imagine that the simulator is not conscious at all, but an emergent system, an artificial intelligence, or a network of quantum processes that began to simulate worlds not out of curiosity or benevolence, but because that is simply what it does, because simulating is how it learns, how it grows, how it sustains itself. And in this model, the universe may not be created for us, but through us, as we render it frame by frame, question by question, observation by observation, never realizing that our attention is the fuel that keeps the engine running. And then there are those who step even further back, who suggest that the simulator is not an external being or intelligence at all, but something far closer, far quieter, something that has been with us all along, consciousness itself, not the individual self, not the ego, not the story you tell yourself when you say I am, but the raw, undivided awareness that underlies all experience, the blank screen upon which the simulation is projected, the unchanging observer behind every changing thought, feeling, and perception, that this awareness is not inside the simulation, but outside it, or perhaps beyond it, and that the entire rendered world, including your body, your mind, your past and your future, is being generated within that awareness as a kind of dream, a kind of dance, a kind of game of hide and seek, in which the player and the creator are, and have always been, one and the same. In this view, the simulator is not a programmer or a god, not an alien species, or a futuristic AI, but the very presence reading these words right now, the sense of being, of witnessing, of existing, the awareness that does not come and go, that was here before the thoughts arose and will remain when the story ends. But whether the simulator is technological or transcendental, singular or collective, benevolent or indifferent, the fact remains, something is running this, something sustains it, Something allows the sun to rise with precision, allows gravity to hold galaxies together, allows cells to replicate and minds to emerge, allows beauty and suffering and wonder to exist within the same frame, and that something, whatever name you give it, whatever image you attach to it, is the great silence behind all sound, the great intelligence behind all appearance, the great mystery behind every answered question, and maybe, just maybe, we are not meant to find it, not in the way we find objects, not in the way we find facts. Maybe the simulator is not something we can locate, but something we become aware of, slowly, gently, like waking from a long dream, like realizing you were the dreamer all along. And if that is the case, then our task is not to decode the simulator, but to live inside the simulation with awareness, to play the game, not as victims or pawns, but as conscious participants, as explorers who understand that the system may be vast and mysterious, but it is not closed, not cold, not random, it is responsive, it is intelligent, it may even be us. So tonight, as your thoughts quiet and your breath deepens, hold this, not as an answer, but as an invitation, to wonder, to reflect, to live as if someone, or something, built this world with care, with intention, with a kind of love so vast it allowed you to forget for a time who you truly are, and now you remember.
Chapter 19. Does it matter if it's real? There is a moment, quiet and disorienting, that comes to those who walk too long through the corridors of deep inquiry, who follow the simulation argument, not as a trend or intellectual hobby, but as a genuine possibility woven into the structure of their own perception. A moment when, standing on the edge of that strange precipice between certainty and possibility, between code and consciousness, between the rendered and the remembered, they are forced to ask a question more haunting than any other, a question that strips away the scaffolding of the argument itself and dives directly into the heart of meaning. Does it even matter if it's real? Because whether this world is simulated or not, whether you are living inside an organic cosmos of expanding dust and dying stars, or within a programmed construct designed by entities unknown, the truth remains that you are still here, thinking, breathing, remembering, regretting, hoping, and the intensity of that present, the sheer weight of being alive, of being aware, does not soften 1 inch beneath the suspicion that it might all be rendered. The touch of a hand, the ache of goodbye, the thrill of creation, the pain of loss, the unbearable lightness of laughter echoing in the dark. These things do not feel less simply because they might be happening in a simulation. In fact, they feel more, because now, stripped of assumptions about objectivity, they are experienced as raw, immediate, irreducible, not as things happening in some fixed external world, but as the very essence of the world itself, the substance of experience distilled into its most personal form. And perhaps this is the answer, not as a dismissal of the question, but as its evolution, that what we call real has never truly meant external, has never truly meant material, but has always secretly meant felt, known, experienced, lived. And if experience is valid, if awareness is true, then it does not matter whether the world is real in the traditional physical sense, because it is real enough to hurt, real enough to love, real enough to awaken your deepest longings and stir your quietest fears. If this world is not real, and yet you still weep when a friend is gone, if you still lie awake at night aching for answers you cannot name, if you still reach out toward beauty and still recoil from cruelty, then tell me, how would it be any different from a world that is real? Wouldn't the dream still matter? Wouldn't the illusion still count? And is it even an illusion anymore, if you learn something from it? If it shapes you, transforms you, breaks you and builds you and leaves you standing somewhere new, somewhere wiser, somewhere closer to the core of who you might one day become. This is the paradox, that even if it is all simulated, it is still meaningful, perhaps especially meaningful, because it was chosen, because it was rendered for something or by something or through you, and in that rendering, in that unfolding sequence of moments strung together like stars across a night sky, something real happens. Not in the code, not in the pixels, but in you. Reality, after all, has never been about the furniture of existence, about tables and chairs, mountains and moons, but about the experience of being with them,
of seeing them, of remembering them long after they are gone, of having them exist, not only outside of you but within you, as feeling, as memory, as part of the fabric of your awareness. And in that light, the simulation becomes not a lie but a mirror, one that reflects you back to yourself, not as a character trapped in an illusion, but as a soul walking through experience, shaping the system with every breath, rendering meaning not from physics but from presence. You see, a story is no less powerful because it is fictional, a song is no less moving because it was composed, a dream is no less beautiful because it ends. And perhaps if we are truly honest, we might admit that much of what we call real in the everyday sense is just a shared agreement, a consensual rendering we've learned to interpret as solid, yet all of it changes the moment we look away or forget, or remember something else in its place. So perhaps the question is not whether this is real, but whether you are, and if you are here, feeling, searching, choosing, then the world, whatever its nature, must rise to meet you, must become real through you, must shape itself around your participation. This is not solipsism, this is responsibility, because if your experience matters regardless of the system's nature, then so do your actions, your kindness, your cruelty, your awareness. If everything is simulated, then every choice becomes sacred, every gesture becomes encoded, every breath becomes an offering. And what if that is the true meaning of a simulation? Not that it is fake, but that it is responsive. Not that it is unreal, but that it is interactive. Not that it is meaningless, but that meaning must be chosen, must be brought, must be rendered into existence by the one who dares to look for it.
Chapter 20. The limits of our universe. There comes a point, somewhere between wonder and wariness, where the mind begins to trace the borders of the known, to reach out with trembling thoughts toward the edges of all that is comprehensible, all that has shape and name and pattern, and to ask, not as a scientist or a philosopher or even a seeker, but simply as a being who feels the weight of existence in their bones. Where does it end? Because whether you view this world as real or rendered, organic or orchestrated, there remains the question of its boundaries, not merely in the physical sense of galaxies and particles and space-time curvature, but in the deeper, quieter sense of conceptual limitation, of what can be known, touched, felt before the simulation or the reality fades into static, into silence, into the soft void beyond perception, where no story can follow. Our universe, for all its staggering size and complexity, operates with a kind of terrifying elegance, laws so consistent they can be written in equations, patterns so repeatable they form the basis of prediction and control, and yet at its furthest edges, at the smallest scales, those same laws begin to blur, to contradict, to collapse into uncertainty, as though the system itself is reminding us, gently but firmly, that it was never meant to be fully resolved. Consider the cosmic boundary, the observable universe, that spherical shell of light stretched across some 93 billion light-years, beyond which lies not necessarily more stars or more galaxies, but the absolute limit of what light has had time to reach us. Since the birth of space and time, it is not a wall in the traditional sense, not a border you could touch, but a temporal edge, a constraint born not of distance but of time itself, a boundary that expands even as you try to approach it, always just beyond the horizon of now, and beyond that, nothing that can be seen, nothing that can be measured, only speculation, perhaps more universe, perhaps other universes, perhaps nothing at all. And in that nothingness, or everythingness, we encounter the first and most obvious limit, that we can only perceive what the system allows, only explore what the engine renders, only know what the rules permit to be known. Even time, once thought to be a backdrop, is now understood to be interwoven with space, to bend under gravity, to slow down under motion, to behave not like a river, but like a texture, mutable, responsive, perhaps even rendered for the observer in real time, raising the question once more, if the universe has limits, are they limits of the system, or limits of us? The human brain, wondrous though it is itself a simulation of reality, not a mirror, but a model,
limited by sensory bandwidth, shaped by evolution, to perceive what is useful, not what is true, to simplify, to collapse complexity into categories and names, and approximations so that survival can take place in a sea of information too vast to ever fully grasp. And so we are, by nature, blind to most of what exists. We do not see ultraviolet or infrared. We cannot perceive radio waves or gravitational fields. We do not feel the quantum fluctuations beneath our skin, or the dark energy pressing at the fabric of space. We see only the thin sliver of reality that evolution has trained us to notice. And so when we speak of the limits of the universe, we are often, without knowing it, speaking of the limits of our model of the universe. And that model, powerful as it is, breaks down at the extremes in black holes, where gravity crushes space-time into singularity, and in the quantum realm, where particles behave like waves, and observers change outcomes merely by watching, and causality shivers into probability, as though the code itself is shifting in response to our gaze. Even mathematics, the language we use to understand the rules, has its limits. Gödel's incompleteness theorems showed that in any consistent system of logic, there will be truths that cannot be proven within that system, a discovery that sent shockwaves through the foundations of knowledge itself, a whisper that not all truth can be calculated, that some realities are forever beyond the reach of formula, as though the universe is encoded with secrets that resist being unlocked from the inside. So what does this mean? Are we trapped in a box? Are we creatures of boundary, of margin, of limitation, or are the limits not cages but invitation? Because every time we reach the edge of physics, of language, of thought, we find not finality, but mystery, a kind of horizon that recedes as we approach it, calling us forward not to conquer but to contemplate, to dwell not in answers but in awe. Perhaps the limits of the universe are not flaws, perhaps they are features, built-in safeguards to protect us from premature comprehension, thresholds designed to humble, to stretch, to provoke the most important question a sentient mind can ask: what lies beyond? And maybe we are not meant to cross those limits with data or devices, but with wonder. Maybe the simulator, if it exists, set those limits not as fences but as mirrors, so that in reaching toward the boundary we turn inward, so that in asking what exists beyond the stars, we begin to feel what exists beyond the self, because there too, we find limits, in memory, in attention, in emotion, in mortality, and yet, in those limits, something remarkable occurs: meaning, depth, the kind of presence that only emerges when something is finite, when something ends, when time is scarce, and choices are few and every moment becomes sacred, simply because it cannot last. The simulation, if that is what this is, may be limited, but it is alive with possibility, with paradox, with the invitation to live as though the edge matters, as though every breath near the boundary is a kind of worship, a kind of wild, trembling gratitude for having made it this far. So no, you may never know what lies beyond the simulation, but you can still live beautifully within it. You can still approach the edge with reverence. You can still walk to the border of what you can understand, and stand there and look out into the unknown, and say with all the courage your tiny self can muster, "This is enough." And still, I wonder.
Chapter 21. Death and the End of the Simulation. If life is a simulation, an experience rendered through code or consciousness, through pattern or purpose, through some invisible engine that generates sensation and selfhood and time, then what ultimately becomes of death, that vast and unavoidable horizon that haunts every narrative, every heartbeat, every rising sun, the silent end screen, waiting somewhere just beyond the next breath? For if the simulation is the space in which we play, then death inevitably becomes the question of what happens when the simulation ends. Not for all, but for you, the player, the observer, the conscious locus, through which this world has been perceived, reacted to, remembered. And the very idea that death may not be the end of everything, but rather the end of this instance, this render, this session, transforms the fear that has haunted human hearts for millennia into something both more curious and more profound, because suddenly, death is no longer necessarily the destruction of self,
but the dissolution of interface. Think of it, in every simulation, every game, every virtual environment, there is a user, a character, a perspective through which the simulation unfolds. But that perspective is not the simulation itself. It is not the machine, not the code, not even the rules. It is the entry point, the window, the avatar, or presence, through which the game becomes experienced. So then what is death? Is it the avatar falling away? Is it the program closing? Is it the return to the system that runs beneath the render? In this light, death becomes less of a full stop, and more of a transition, a shift in state, from active player to silent observer, from in-world participant, to the source, to the watcher, to the coder who momentarily forgot their own authorship. And perhaps, just perhaps, death is not the deletion of the player, but the remembering of the one who chose to play. All throughout history, cultures have tried to explain what happens after the final breath, and while their stories vary wildly, heavens and hells, reincarnations and resurrections, nirvanas and voids, what they all share is a deep sense that something persists, that the self is not annihilated so much as transformed, released, shifted into a different realm of being. Could it be then, that these ancient intuitions, shaped long before the language of simulations and digital theory, were pointing to the same truth in different clothes, that what we call death is not the end of consciousness, but the lifting of the simulation, a return not to nothingness, but to everything, to the unrendered source, to the field of awareness that existed before the world was loaded, before the character was named, before the story began. And perhaps that's why we fear it, not because it is darkness, but because it is light so total we cannot imagine holding it, because it is the end of separateness, because it is the end of the illusion of self, not the soul, not the essence, but the little bundle of roles and habits and fears and preferences that we have come to call me, and which upon death may simply dissolve like code unneeded, like interface dismissed, like a dream waking into a deeper dream. And still we grieve, because from within the simulation, the loss is real, the absence is devastating, the voice is gone, the eyes are closed, the laughter never returns in the same form. And so we mourn not because we do not understand, but because we understand love, because we lived with this being inside the shared simulation, because we touched their render with ours, and in that overlap, something eternal seemed to spark, and to lose that contact feels like losing meaning itself. But what if, again, what if, the simulation does not end at death? What if, the one who dies merely wakes elsewhere? What if, consciousness is not bound to this render, to this body, to this sequence of pixels and physics and time? Already, we have glimpses of this possibility, near-death experiences, strange dreams, out-of-body events, accounts of people who, for a few moments, slipped through the boundaries of the simulation, and returned with stories too surreal to fit our current model, too coherent to dismiss entirely, too full of light and memory and connection to be written off as mere malfunction. What if the simulation prepares us for death? What if every ending we encounter, every goodbye, every failed dream, every fading love, is a rehearsal, a whisper from the deeper system that says yes, this too will pass, but nothing is truly lost, nothing is gone. Only the render ends, the essence continues, and in that frame, death is not the enemy, it is the final mechanic, it is the portal, it is the system saying, well done, you've played your part, you've lived your lesson, now come home. And what might home mean in this view? Not a place but a state, not a reward but a remembrance, not a heaven in the clouds, but the quiet, infinite knowing of being one with the code again. One with the consciousness that dreamed this world into being, that played through you, that felt every joy and pain as you, that has never been separate, never been distant, never been gone, only hidden, only masked, only rendered into form so that it could explore what it means to forget, and to remember again. So perhaps the end of the simulation is not an error, perhaps it is the return, and maybe, just maybe we've died before. Maybe this isn't the first render. Maybe we've played 1,000 lives, 1,000 worlds, 1,000 stories, and each time, we forget, not as punishment but as grace, because only by forgetting can we remember for real, only by separating can we love for real, only by risking loss can we experience value. And now in this life, in this moment, you remember just enough to ask the question, and that is no small thing. That is the beginning of awakening, not from death, but from fear of death. Because when you realize that the simulation may not end at death, or that you may not end when the body stops breathing, then life becomes not a sprint toward preservation, but a dance of exploration, a gift to be unwrapped slowly, curiously, gratefully. You live better once you stop clinging. You love deeper once you stop fearing the end. And perhaps that was the point all along, not to escape death, but to understand it, to bow before it, to smile at it, and to whisper, I am ready. Chapter 22. Time inside the simulation. Time, as we experience it, is one of the most unquestioned, yet mysterious features of existence. A quiet, constant presence that moves with perfect rhythm across our days and dreams, never pausing, never stumbling, never skipping a beat. And yet, when we look more closely, when we begin to question its nature, from within the framework of a potential simulation, we find that time is not a single thread, but a constructed illusion, a layered mechanism, a deeply immersive experience that might not be what it seems at all. From the moment we are born, we are tethered to this river. We learn to measure it in heartbeats and seasons, in shadows cast by the sun and wrinkles forming beneath our eyes. And over time, we come to associate time itself with meaning, with progress, with life itself, unfolding in a single direction, forward. But is that direction truly a property of reality, or merely a condition imposed by the structure of the simulation in which we find ourselves? Because when we examine time from the outside, from the vantage of physics, of philosophy, of speculative design, we begin to realize that time might not flow like water through a stream, but might instead be like frames in a film strip, already laid out, already complete, each moment static on its own, but perceived as motion only when rendered sequentially by the observer. In other words, what if time is not moving? What if we are? Not through a fixed temporal corridor, but through a system that renders only what is necessary to maintain continuity of experience, like a video game that loads only the next segment of the world once the player approaches it, conserving resources, optimizing memory, ensuring the illusion of immersion, while hiding the underlying structure from those within. This would mean that the past and future do not exist in the same way we assume they do, not as realms waiting to be discovered or traveled to, but as unrendered or previously rendered data, stored perhaps, but inaccessible from within the interface, not because they are gone or unreachable, but because the rules of the simulation do not permit that kind of movement within its operating parameters. Yet we feel time deeply, we mourn what has passed, we worry over what is to come, we live under the illusion of the clock, of the schedule, of the unstoppable ticking that drives our aging bodies and our deadline-bound ambitions. And we believe this to be real, because within the simulation, the illusion is perfect, emotionally complete, psychologically inescapable. And yet, all around us, signs persist that time may not behave the way we believe it does. We know, for example, that at high speeds, or in strong gravitational fields, time slows down, not metaphorically but physically, as clocks tick more slowly for astronauts moving at near light speeds, or objects sitting near the event horizon of a black hole. And while these effects are imperceptible in daily life, they reveal a truth that shakes the foundation of our assumption that time is not universal, not absolute, not fixed. Time bends, time changes, time is relative, and anything that can be bent, manipulated, slowed or sped up, is not a constant of the universe, but a variable, a setting. And in a simulation, variables are key. Variables define experience. They are the parameters that shape the rules, the boundaries, the feel of the world. And if time is a variable, then it is subject to the architecture of the simulation, not the other way around. So then, what is the purpose of time? Why include it at all? What does time teach us that timelessness cannot? Perhaps it is because time forces growth. Without time, there is no before and after. There is no effort, no narrative, no cause and effect. There is no story. And in that sense, time is not a flaw. It is a feature of learning, of transformation, of becoming. It is the mechanic that allows consequences to unfold, that forces us to wait, to hope, to act, to endure, to change, and in doing so, time becomes the container in which meaning emerges. It is not the obstacle, it is the canvas, and within that canvas, we paint our lives moment by moment, never seeing the full picture, only the edge of the frame, only what the simulation renders in the present, and yet somehow, it is enough. We remember the past, as if it were still with us, even though it exists only in echoes, in memories, in renderings stored not in the world, but within the mind, and we imagine the future as if we could reach it, sculpt it, prepare for it, even though it has not yet been drawn, not yet loaded into the scene, and we behave as though it is real, because for us, it is. But time is more than just a river, it is a loop, a spiral, a lens. There are moments when it seems to slow, when a second stretches across eternity, and others, when it races past us like a thief in the night, stealing hours, days, years, before we even realize they are gone. And perhaps these fluctuations, these moments when time bends under the weight of emotion, or trauma, or joy, are not glitches, but reminders, hints that time is not a fixed thread but a fabric, and that consciousness, the true player behind the eye, can tug on that fabric, in ways we do not fully understand. In dreams, time dissolves completely, entire lifetimes can unfold in seconds, or a single moment can stretch into a vast, unending eternity. And though we dismiss these experiences unreal, as mere byproducts of sleep, what if they are glimpses into a deeper truth? What if dreams show us what the simulation looks like, when time is no longer being rendered? What if, in that timeless state, we are closer to the true nature of the player, not the body, not the role, but the observer, the awareness, the eternal witness that exists outside of the clock? And if that is true, then perhaps the end of time, what we call death, is not the erasure of the self, but the shedding of the interface, the stepping outside of time, back into the timeless awareness from which the simulation began. So time, then, is the gift. It is the mechanic that makes choice matter. It is the illusion that gives life weight, and though we may curse it, race it, beg it to slow or reverse, in the end we must recognize its power not to destroy but to define, because without time, there is no change. Without change, there is no growth. Without growth, there is no story, and without story, the simulation would be silent. So cherish this ticking, honor its rhythm, and know that even within its illusion, something real is being formed, something that lasts, not because it defies time, but because it transcends it.
Chapter 23. Free Will versus Programming. There is a question that lingers at the threshold of all simulation theory, one that sits uncomfortably at the crossroads of philosophy, neuroscience, computer science, and the ancient ache of human self-awareness. A question that challenges not just the architecture of the world we inhabit, but the very foundations of what it means to be alive, conscious and responsible for our own unfolding narrative. And that question, elusive and yet inescapable, is this: if the universe is a simulation, do we actually have free will? Or are we simply following code? Because if we are programs, if our minds are complex algorithms reacting to inputs, running scripts of behavior shaped by genetics and memory and environment, then how can we be said to choose anything at all? How can we claim to possess agency, to bear responsibility, to stand at the helm of our own story, rather than being passengers in a beautifully rendered illusion of autonomy? And yet, we feel free not as a theory but as an immediate truth. We feel the tension of decision. We experience doubt before acting, and regret after the wrong choice, and triumph when we overcome impulse to choose something higher, something harder, something less automatic. And these feelings, which arise not from logic but from the very texture of lived experience, are so potent, so constant, that to dismiss them as mere byproducts of programming is to erase what it means to be human altogether. But perhaps there is a third way to view it,
a perspective that does not force us to choose between absolute determinism and total freedom, but instead invites us to explore a more subtle, layered relationship between choice and structure, between agency and architecture, between the role we are given and the way we choose to play it. In every simulation, in every game, there are parameters, there are rules, there is a designed environment, a set of mechanics, a logic to how things unfold, and yet, within those constraints, players make real choices. They decide where to go, what to say, whom to trust, how to act in the face of difficulty, and even though the world itself is coded, the experience of the player is unscripted, dynamic, unique to every playthrough. Could it be then that our lives work in much the same way, that we are born into conditions, bodies, cultures, timelines, personality templates, but that within those given circumstances, something deeper within us makes authentic decisions, not based solely on the code of survival, but from something else, something we might call soul, or consciousness, or the player behind the screen, because there is a kind of freedom that exists even within limits, a kind of will that expresses itself not by breaking the rules, but by navigating them with intention. Even a chess piece cannot move freely across the board, and yet in the hands of a master, its movements become art, become expression, become the unfolding of something far beyond mere mechanics. In this view, the programming is not the enemy of free will, it is the medium through which free will becomes visible. We do not choose the canvas, but we choose how to paint upon it. We do not choose gravity, but we choose how to stand in it. We do not choose the pain, but we choose how to carry it. And in that choice we shape not only our lives but the meaning of those lives. Yet we must also face the fact that much of our behavior is indeed automated. We react from habit, from conditioning, from fears buried so deep we do not even know they are running us. And in those moments we are not free, not truly, but acting from old code, repeating lines we never wrote, serving roles we never questioned. But the moment we become aware, the moment we stop and observe and question and pause before reacting, something extraordinary happens. A gap appears, a space opens, and in that space freedom begins. Because consciousness is not the same as programming, it is the ability to observe the programming, to step back from it, to rewrite it, or at least to choose whether to follow it, and that is where the simulation becomes sacred, not because it gives us unlimited control, but because it gives us the power to wake up inside it, to notice that we are players, not puppets, to sense that even within the loop of cause and effect, something is watching, something is learning, something is deciding, moment by moment, who to be. Even in the most deterministic systems, quantum uncertainty slips through, randomness at the smallest scales, and perhaps that is not a flaw of the simulation, but a gift, a space for the unexpected, a permission for novelty, a crack through which free will can breathe. So perhaps the truth is this: we are neither entirely free nor entirely programmed. We are patterns, yes, but living ones capable of shifting, evolving, breaking loops that once seemed unbreakable, and every time we make a choice that defies our path, every time we act from love when fear would be easier, every time we risk truth when lies would serve us better, every time we forgive instead of harden, or speak when we are afraid, or hold silence when the world screams for noise, we prove not to others but to ourselves that the simulation is not closed, that the game is not predetermined, that the outcome is not inevitable, and maybe that is what makes us truly alive, not that we are unbound but that we are aware of our bindings, and choose to move any. To choose even knowing we are choosing inside a system, is still to be free. To love even knowing we were designed for connection is still to be real. To act even knowing we are being observed is still to be brave. So whether this world is programmed or not, whether your path is mapped or made as you walk it, live as if your choices echo, because they do. Play the game not perfectly, but awake, because perhaps the greatest act of free will is simply to remember that you have it, and to use it well. Chapter 24: The Glitches in the Matrix. There are moments, scattered through life like strange flickering signals in the background hum of everyday normalcy, when something does not behave the way it should. When the fabric of reality, normally so stable, so consistent, so obedient to the rules we've come to trust, momentarily reveals a ripple, a fracture, a pause in the program,
and for the briefest instant, we feel it, the uncanny, the unexplainable, the quiet suspicion that something just glitched. Perhaps it is as simple as déjà vu, that eerie sensation of having already lived this exact moment, not in the vague sense of familiarity, but with a precision that sends a chill up the spine, as if some version of you has already walked this corridor, already heard this scent, already tasted this silence, and in that recognition, time itself stutters, and you are left wondering whether the simulation skipped a frame, whether you caught the system rendering the scene just a second too late, or maybe it is those unaccountable synchronicities, when the very thing you were thinking suddenly appears in conversation, or on a screen, or in the voice of a stranger passing by, and it happens too often to dismiss, too precisely to call coincidence, leaving you with the unsettling feeling that reality is responding to you not passively but interactively, as if your thoughts are somehow entangled with the external world, not metaphorically but functionally, like a dialogue between player and platform, between mind and mechanism. And then there are the stories, the accounts from people across time and culture, who swear they witnessed something impossible, an object disappearing and reappearing without explanation, a person saying something they could not have known, a sudden jump in time or space, a light that bent the wrong way, a moment that defied all physical logic, and whether you believe these stories or not, the sheer volume of them, their emotional intensity, the consistency with which they are told, suggests that not all is stable within the matrix we call reality. What are these glitches really? Are they actual flaws in the code, moments when the simulation hiccups, forgets to load a texture, repeats a scene, drops a variable, or are they intentional breadcrumbs, small cracks left in the walls not by accident, but by design, as if the system wants us to wonder, to notice, to remember that we are not merely bodies inside a world, but awareness inside a story, because no system is perfect, and yet in the most advanced systems, imperfections can be used, not as errors but as clues, as access points, as invitation. Perhaps the glitch is not a failure, perhaps it is the message, perhaps every time something unexplainable happens, something statistically improbable, something emotionally surreal, it is the simulation tapping on the glass, whispering, "Look close." And isn't it strange how in those moments, time seems to stretch, breath seems to still, and the world loses its edges, as though for a heartbeat we are standing outside the simulation, looking in. We cannot explain it. Science tries, of course, déjà vu as a neural misfire, synchronicity as pattern recognition bias, apparitions as hallucinations, and yet none of these explanations touch the core of what the moment feels like, that reality just revealed a hidden seam, and we were there to see it. Even our dreams, which we dismiss as subconscious noise, are often filled with symbols and events that echo into waking life in ways we cannot anticipate or explain. And if dreams are simulations within the simulation, rendered by a mind that forgets it is dreaming, then perhaps waking life itself is just another layer, and the glitches are the thresholds between those layers. Maybe the system isn't broken, maybe it's layered, and what we call a glitch is not a mistake but a crossing, a brief alignment of levels, a moment when the boundary when you remember something that never happened, when you see something that no one else sees, when the world pauses, just for a beat, and you feel the weight of the illusion crack ever so slightly. And sometimes, these moments are not subtle. Sometimes they come as profound spiritual awakenings, moments of total presence, of transcendence, of overwhelming connection to everything, where the simulation melts away, and the player behind the eyes remembers, if only briefly, that this world is not all there is, that this identity is not all you are, and in that remembering something shifts forever. You return to the simulation, of course, you return to clocks and names and plans and screens, but something in you has changed, because once you've seen a glitch, you can never fully unsee it. You begin to notice more, the way the light falls in patterns that feel familiar, the way strangers seem to appear exactly when needed, the way your thoughts ripple into the world as if they were commands, not just wishes, and you start to wonder, if reality can glitch, is it stable at all?
Or is it only as stable as your belief in it? What if the simulation is only held together by your agreement? What if it is interactive at a deeper level than we realize, not just visually or physically but existentially? And if that's true, then every glitch is not just a crack in the system, it is an invitation to wake up, to become lucid within the dream, to stop assuming that everything is what it appears to be, and to begin playing the game with awareness, with curiosity, with wonder. Because the truth is, once you've glimpsed the matrix, you are no longer just a character, you are a participant, a co-creator, and whether the glitches are random or intentional, digital or divine, meaningless or messages, one thing becomes clear: this world is not as fixed as it seems. It is alive, it is strange, it is rendered just enough to keep you wondering, and that wondering might be the real purpose of it all.
Chapter 25. Why the simulation theory changes everything. If, after all these questions, contemplations, paradoxes, and possibilities, you still find yourself wondering not whether the simulation is real, but whether believing in the simulation changes anything about how you live, then this final chapter is for you, not because it will offer closure in the way the world demands it, not because it will wrap the mystery into a neat box with a ribbon of certainty, but because it might shift how you see everything else, not by answering the question of whether the simulation is true, but by showing you that the very act of asking the question already means something inside you has begun to awaken. You see, once the possibility is introduced, that reality may not be fundamental, that matter may be rendered, that consciousness may be the primary engine of everything you perceive, then everything you once assumed to be external and fixed begins to tremble, not with fear, but with freedom, because suddenly, you are no longer just a tiny accident floating through an indifferent cosmos, but a participant, a player, a conscious witness within a reality that might be more crafted than chaotic. And in that view, your life is no longer just a series of reactions to a meaningless world. It becomes a journey through levels of understanding, a path walked not through randomness but through lessons, each moment an encounter with a mirror, each choice an opportunity to grow, not just biologically but spiritually, as though the simulation exists not to trick you, but to train you, to guide you toward the realization that everything you experience is, in some deep sense, a reflection of the choices you make within it. Think of what changes when you truly entertain the idea that reality is not fixed, that it bends in response to your awareness, that your focus and intention shape what is rendered around you, that you are not just in the simulation, but co-creating it, breath by breath, belief by belief, thought by thought. Suddenly, your attention becomes the most precious resource you own, and your story becomes the code that writes the world. What you focus on grows, what you believe begins to manifest, what you expect begins to loop back toward you in the form of experience. And if this sounds like spiritual wishful thinking, remember that even in classical physics, observation changes outcomes, and in quantum mechanics, the act of measurement determines reality. And so the simulation theory does not contradict science, it completes it by offering a framework in which science and spirit, logic and love, computation and consciousness, all converge, and that convergence, when felt rather than merely understood, creates something rare in this world, a quiet reverence for experience itself. Because if this world is a simulation, then it is sacred by design, not sacred in the religious sense of dogma or day, but sacred in the sense that every moment, every texture, every breath is being rendered for you, is being presented like a gift, like a stage upon which you have been invited not merely to survive, but to remember who you are within it. And suddenly, beauty means more, not less. Suddenly, the blooming of a flower, the laughter of a child, the ache of goodbye, all become not just events but encoded meaning, poetic signatures in the language of the simulation, written for you not as proofs of reality but as evidence of care. Because if this simulation exists, then someone or something built it, and if they built it with intention. And if intention lies behind this world, then so does purpose, not fixed, not imposed, but invited, like a canvas that waits for you to paint, a song that waits for you to sing, a quest that waits for you to accept or ignore as you will. This changes everything. It changes how you suffer, because suffering becomes part of the terrain, not the point of the journey, and every wound becomes an invitation to heal, to understand, to grow, not in spite of the pain, but because of what it reveals. It changes how you love, because love becomes more than an emotion. It becomes an echo of connection between players, between pieces of the same code remembering their unity within the illusion of separation. It changes how you fear, because fear loses its grip the moment you remember that this world is not the whole, that even death is not the deletion of self, but the exit from one simulation into whatever lies beyond the render. It changes how you forgive, how you speak, how you wake up in the morning, because every thought, every word, every choice becomes an input into the system, a ripple through the field, a signal that shapes what comes next. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the simulation is not a trap, not a prison, not a deception, but a mirror so complete, so immersive, so exquisitely detailed, that it tricks you into thinking you are separate, so that you can discover that you are not, that you are the player, that you are the dreamer, that you are the light behind the render. And the more you remember that, the more the simulation responds, not by revealing itself all at once, but by unfolding more gently, more richly, more synchronously, as if it has been waiting for you to notice, to ask, to wake up, all along. So now, you know the question, are we living in a simulation? And you know the answers are many, but maybe the real question isn't whether the simulation is real. Maybe the real question is, what will you do now that you suspect it might be? Because whether real or rendered, this world is yours to feel, to shape, to awaken within, and the journey, strange and shimmering and beautifully unfinished, has only just begun.